Welcome, everybody. I'm Patrick Hollister with Partnership for Health. Partnership for Health is the combined public health departments of Becker, Clay, Otter Tail, and Wilkin counties. We've been involved. I've lived in this region now, and I've worked for Partnership for Health for about 10 years. We have been involved, and I've been involved with the city of Pelican Rapids off and on during that 10-year period on various bike and pedestrian related projects. That's what I do for a living. I work on bike and pedestrian projects around the 4-county area. And recently, particularly in the last 2 years, I've gotten more involved with Pelican Rapids, and we're going to talk more about that when I get into my presentation. But I want to just I also want to acknowledge Jill Chamberlain here with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention, and also Katie Katuski, our Minnesota Green Corps member. We're kind of your 3 co-hosts for this meeting. So first of all, I'll just say quickly why we're here. This is the first in a series of 3 public input meetings regarding the Pelican Rapids Bike and Pedestrian Plan. We hope to have the plan completed by the end of calendar year 2020. COVID-19 has obviously thrown us a curveball in terms of the process of how we do this and potentially how long it takes. But I certainly, even if we spill over a little bit into 2021, I don't want to spill over too much into 2021. We're hoping to get this wrapped up or almost wrapped up by New Year's Eve. So I think with that, let me say one more time for the benefit of everybody who's joined us. This Zoom meeting is being recorded by 2 different people involved, and our intent is to make this meeting available online for free for everybody soon. I think probably both on the Pelican Rapids High School YouTube channel and on a website specific to this bicycle and pedestrian plan project, which we have not launched yet, but we will soon. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Jill. I think Jill has some Zoom technicalities that she wants to go over with you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So just a couple things. So my task here, I'd offered to help out Patrick. I will help with sound and some of the poll discussion questions. And some folks have already started saying they have questions. General flow of this, there will be a presentation just to get everybody grounded, and then it'll pivot to discussion. So some of the questions getting into like, hey, if there's a plan for a path, how is that paid for? We're going to get there. So, but we aren't going to start at that point just because we want to make sure we get everybody on the same page. So to help us get started, this is my practice question just to make sure everybody's okay with the poll. So I'm going to launch a question. You're going to see it come up. It's very controversial. And the question is, lutefisk is, and if you could please pick an answer. And typically when we do these poll questions, I'll leave them open for about 30 seconds, maybe a minute. There are a couple that might take a little more time. And then I can see that I've got 14 out of 18 responses. I know we have 2 people on the phone. So for our folks on the phone, the question is, lutefisk is either the food of my people, something I would try, not for me, or what is it? So I'm going to end the poll. And, I don't think this is too shocking. 40% of our respondents, I'm going to share results, have said not for me. Not for me was the majority. However, we had 27% of our respondents saying it's the food of my people. Technically, it's both the food of my people and not for me. So, all right. So we'll do this with the questions. And again, I think hopefully with this, an intention to kind of spark some discussion and to get us grounded. So, all right. So hold on. I stopped sharing results. So this next question is actually about walking. And so I'm just going to put this forward. So I'm launching the poll. And the question is, I walk or roll, and think about rolling if you are someone who uses a mobility device, maybe a walker or a wheelchair, but generally in terminology, we talk about we walk and we roll. But why do you walk? Is it to support your physical health, have fun, get to and from work, socialize, run errands, support my mental health, be in nature, or is there another reason?
And you're allowed to provide up to 2 answers.
Yep. So we'll hold here for. And then I'll just share the results. I'm going to leave it open for about another 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And it looks like we have 13 people voted. And let me share the results. All right, so predominantly, and again, folks on the phone, if you want to share what your own experience or if one of those jumped out at you, but the predominant number of people talk about supporting your physical health. That is the top. We're 13 out of the 13 folks who voted. And then second is support your mental health. Interesting. That had 5 people. And then next was be in nature, are the kind of in the tops. And for other, if you did mark other, if you had something specific, you can put it in the chat box. Again, just to let us know what that might be for you, because it's good to know. Is there anything that surprises people about this?
Let me say on behalf of Partnership for Health that I love the fact that support my physical health and support my mental health were number 1 and 2 there. So,
Yep.
And I see Rita nodding on behalf of Sanford. So that's terrific. Good.
All right. All right, I'm going to stop sharing these. Now I have a different set of questions. There's actually 2 questions. And this is going to be about biking. And so I'll leave this open just a little bit longer. So, all right. The first question is, in the last 2 weeks, how often did you ride a bike? And those answers are between 1 to 3 days, 4 to 6 days, 7 to 9 days, 10 or more days, or I did not ride a bike in the last 2 weeks. All answers are good. And then the second question is going to seem a lot like the walking question, but I'm just curious, for those that do bike, what motivates you?
So, Jill, I believe for question number 1, you're only allowed 1 answer. For
Correct.
question number 2, you're allowed up to 2 answers.
Yep.
And the computer, or Zoom, I should say, is not going to let you hit the submit button until you've answered both questions, I think, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
That,
yeah, no
that
problem.
is true.
Yeah.
We tested these yesterday a little bit.
We did a technical rehearsal on all this yesterday.
All right, I'm going to just give a few more seconds. And all right, I'm going to end. Okay, and so I will now share results. All right, so we've got about half haven't biked in the last couple of weeks. That's great. It's good if you have, okay if you haven't. And then some. We've got 3 that are in the 1 to 3 day range, and others that are 4 to 6 day range. And then why? Interesting, there's not that same diversity of responses for why people walk maybe versus why people bike, but the dominant one seems to be support physical health. But then second was have fun. So that's interesting. I don't know if folks have thought any reaction. Is there anything surprising about this? All right. Well, we started with these questions just to get a sense of who's here. And then also kind of illustrating, while this is a bicycle and pedestrian plan, there are different factors to consider when you get into the communities figuring out how they want to make it so it's easier, safer, and accessible for people to move, and what that can look like. So, all right, Patrick, I am sending it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you. And you're putting the presentation up, I presume. Okay,
Yep.
terrific. Okay, so this will be quick. Amongst all the people that are on this Zoom call, there are varying levels of background knowledge about how we got here and why we're here, et cetera. And so I'm just gonna, in order to get everybody up to a basic base level of understanding of the context of all of this, I'm just gonna run through this quickly. So this bicycle and pedestrian plan that we're involved in creating is sponsored by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention. Jill is with the Center for Prevention, and we're grateful to Jill and to the Center for Prevention for providing this sponsorship. I work for Partnership for Health, and so you can see the Partnership for Health logo and Blue Cross logo right there on the screen. I think we can go to the next slide. So I just want to refresh people's memory about what happened last year and how that ties into what we're doing this year. So last year, well, back in, I'll say, let me start with back in 2018, as I understand it, the city of Pelican Rapids approached MnDOT District 4 and said that the city was experiencing too many utility failures under 59 and 108. And they were interested in the possibility of reconstructing 59 and 108 soon, relatively soon, because the only way to do long-term, proper, sustainable fixes to those utilities would be to dig up the roads. And so sometime, as I understand it, sometime around late 2018, MnDOT and City of Pelican Rapids reached an agreement that they would reconstruct 59 and 108 within Pelican Rapids city limits in 2024. And then a staff member of MnDOT District 4 actually approached me because she knew that I like to do this type of thing and said, Patrick, would Partnership for Health have resources and interest in conducting some sort of a public input process in 2019 to create a concept plan for the new 59 and 108 in Pelican Rapids city limits. And I said, I'd be delighted to do that. And so we hired a consultant to help facilitate that process. We had a series of 3 public input meetings at Lake Region Electric Co-op. Obviously, this is pre-COVID-19. We wouldn't be able to do a meeting like this right now. You can see the mayor up at the podium giving the introductory remarks before the meeting. Next slide.
Nope, sorry.
Another thing that happened last year, about this time last year, was Kate Martinez and I applied for and received on behalf of the city of Pelican Rapids the opportunity to do a bikeable community workshop. And we had that in the spring/early summer of 2019. And here are the folks that led that workshop. It was a day-long event at the library. Part of the event was in the meeting room at the library, and part of it was out on bikes. And we just talked about how to make Pelican Rapids generally more bikeable. Next slide. So this is the first and unfortunately so far only in-person meeting of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan Committee. This happened in this meeting happened in February of 2020. I should probably explain a little bit about the transition between the 59 and 108 concept plan and the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So while we were doing the 59 and 108 concept plan, I got comments from a number of residents saying, this is great that you're, soliciting our input on 59 and 108, but there are other parts of town that we would like to make more bicycle and pedestrian friendly too. What about those streets? What about those neighborhoods? And so that got me thinking, well, maybe in 2020, we should do a bicycle and pedestrian plan for the whole city, not just 59 and 108. And that's when, I think it was back in October of 2019, I applied for a sponsorship from Blue Cross Blue Shield Center of Prevention to do the bicycle and pedestrian plan. And very fortunately, we were awarded that sponsorship, and that's why we're here today. So this meeting here, this is the Pelican Rapids Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan Advisory Committee. We had our, as I said, we had our first and unfortunately so far only in-person meeting as a committee in February of 2020 at City Hall. We may not be able to gather again in person depending on what happens with COVID-19, but I'm sure glad we did at least once. Next slide. One of the things that we had the committee do at that February 2020 meeting was I brought along some aerial photos of Pelican Rapids, and I invited the committee to draw on those photos.
Hi, this is Dan Husted.
Hi, Dan. Welcome. I invited the committee to draw with Sharpies on those aerial photos their ideas for additional bike and pedestrian infrastructure in Pelican Rapids. We took I still have the original maps that they drew on in my cube. But what we did was we took those drawings, hand-drawn markings on the aerial photos, and we digitized them. And so if you go to the next slide. So this is the GIS digitized version of the hand drawings on the on those aerial photos. And I emailed this map as an attachment to a bunch of people yesterday, including many of you. I can't guarantee that I emailed it to every single one of you, but my guess is that most of you probably got this by email yesterday. If you did not get this from me yesterday and you would like it, certainly let me know. I'll give you my contact information at the end of this meeting. And I'd be happy to email this to anyone. So I'm not gonna, at this moment, I'm not gonna sort of go, line by line as to what's on the map. But let me say really briefly, and you need to forgive me here, I am partially colorblind, and I have trouble sometimes in the orange, green, and brown kind of area. So I'm gonna take a guess here, but there are three colors of lines on this map. There is what looks to me like dark blue, and you can see it all in the key in the bottom right corner of the map. So the dark blue is bike, and yeah, Jill's showing it with her digital hand there. The bottom, the dark blue there is labeled bike, and what that means is some sort of bike facility along that street or along that corridor, path, whatever. We're not at the point yet of specifying what exactly we mean by bike facility. It might be on-street painted bike lanes. It could be a separated bike path, separated from the street, but some sort of bike facility. Then the top color in the key there among the lines, it's labeled sidewalk. And to me, sometimes that looks green and sometimes that looks orange. I don't know, Jill, help me out. What does that look like to you?
It's orange.
It's orange. Okay, I'll take your word for it. So the orange line is labeled sidewalk, and that just simply means that the committee is suggesting that additional sidewalk there would be good. And then what looks to me like light blue we labeled that multi-use. And generally speaking, that means a multi-use path, or what's sometimes referred to as a trail. And then there are some other symbols on the map. A bike symbol means a bike rack. There's a sort of blue and white symbol that looks like a person taking a drink from a drinking fountain. We labeled that hydration. That is, the idea is that there would be some sort of a water fountain there or something. And then there is a, to me that looks orange, but there's sort of a box with 3 symbols in it labeled repair station. The idea there is that it would be one of those self-serve free bike maintenance stations. Jill's indicating where they are with her digital pencil there. And then there's another label that shows sort of a male and female symbol, and it's labeled restrooms. So the idea is there would be restrooms there. And then there's a series of vertical black and white lines. It looks like a UPC sticker on a product you buy from a store, but that represents crosswalks. And that in particular is a comment that I got a lot last year when we were doing the 59 and 108 plan. Was people said we need more painted crosswalks. And so those symbols indicate where the committee thought would be good places for painted crosswalks. I want to make one other quick comment about 59 and 108 here. The main purpose of this Zoom meeting and of the bicycle and pedestrian plan process is that we're involved in 2020 is to plan for bicycle and pedestrian improvements in the city as a whole, beyond 59 and 108. The actual planning for what gets built on 59 and 108 in 2024 is being driven by a separate group that is being led by Tom Pace of MnDOT District 4, who is on this call or on this Zoom meeting. So certainly, if anyone in this Zoom meeting has comments about what should happen on 59 and 108, I welcome those comments. You can put them in the chat box, and we will do our best to respond to them. But I want you to know that the entity that is primarily responsible for planning what happens on 59 and 108 in 2024 is being managed or facilitated by MnDOT District 4, and specifically Tom. And it's my understanding that they are planning to have their own public input meeting, the first of several, either late summer or early fall 2020. And if COVID-19 is still a major factor, it might have to be online. But MnDOT District 4, as I understand it, is planning on having their own public input meeting specifically on 59 and 108, either late summer, early fall. And there will be an opportunity for the public to comment on drawings that District 4 themselves come up with. So all I'm trying to say here is I'm not the main guy for 59 and 108. Tom's the main guy for 59 and 108, but certainly we'll take your comments on 59 and 108 during the Zoom call if anybody has any. So then I think, Jill, if you could go to the next slide.
Oops, sorry, hang on.
What I did here was because when you show all of Pelican Rapids on one screen, it gets kind of small. I asked Apex, who is kindly making these maps for us, I asked Apex to make 4 additional maps where we zoom in to 1/4 of town. And just for convenience, I broke the town into northwest of 59 and 108, northeast of 59 and 108, southeast of 59 and 108, and southwest of 59 and 108. So obviously this is the northwest of 59 and 108 map. And then next slide, Jill, please. Then this is obviously northeast of 59 and 108. And then predictably enough, if you go to the next slide, Jill, this is southeast. And then next slide, southwest. Now we can, if we get into a more detailed conversation about some of these lines or some of these proposals or some ideas that you have, we can certainly revisit these maps later in the Zoom call, but I just wanted to make you aware that they're available. Okay, so next slide, please. So Pelican Rapids prides itself, rightly so, on being a culturally diverse community. And so we did want to take a look at the demographics of Pelican Rapids. These are maps from the 2010 census. As you know, the census comes out every 10 years. The U.S. Census Bureau is in the process right now of gathering and analyzing the data for the 2020 census. And unfortunately, the 2020 census information will not be available until summer 2021. So unfortunately, 2010 is the most recent data that we have available. But what we did was I asked Apex to look at the 2010 census data for the two largest immigrant populations in Pelican Rapids, those being Latinos and Somalis, and just look at where they are geographically distributed. And our motivation for doing this is really health equity. We know we're obviously interested, and I'm speaking on behalf of Partnership for Health, but I think Jill would agree that the Center for Prevention feels the same way. We're certainly interested in the health, and in this particular instance, the opportunity to safely and conveniently bike and walk for all people of Pelican Rapids. But there are certain groups, not only in Pelican Rapids, but nationwide, who historically have faced greater challenges being able to safely navigate their communities by biking and walking. And certainly racial or ethnic minorities or immigrant groups are examples of those types of populations that experience those challenges. And so we were curious where those populations reside geographically in Pelican Rapids. And so we have these color-coded maps indicating that. And what looks to me like red is the greatest concentration. And I'm sure this is no surprise to anybody on the call who lives in Pelican Rapids. But on in the left map, you see where the greatest concentration of Latino residents are in the city, at least as of 2010. And on the right, you can see where the highest concentration of Somali residents are in the community, at least as of 2010. So next slide. Kate Martinez, who I don't believe is on this call, but was very helpful last year in the 59 and 108 process. She is, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is both an art teacher with Pelican Rapids School District and the chair of the Pelican Rapids Park Board. She took a lot of photos last year of 59 and 108. She took photos as examples of what she thought were problems or challenges with 59 and 108 as they currently exist. And Kate herself is quite concerned about health equity. And so she was out walking along this segment of 108 with her camera, and she encountered this family who told her that they do not own a car, and they were navigating 108 on the side here where there really isn't much in terms of bicycle or pedestrian accommodation. She asked the family if she could take their photo. They said yes. She said, "Do you mind if you are identifiable in the photo?" They said, "No, we don't mind." But nevertheless, when she took the photo, after she took the photo, she took a Sharpie and covered the faces in the photo just to preserve their anonymity. But this photo is a good example of how little accommodation there is for some stretches of 59 and 108. And it's true on some other streets in Pelican Rapids as well for bicyclists and pedestrians, or people riding bikes and people walking. I think if you go to the next slide, Jill, here's somebody pushing a stroller along a segment of 59. Again, no bicycle or pedestrian accommodation to speak of. And so this was another photo that Kate took to sort of demonstrate where the infrastructure is lacking. And I think if you go to the next slide. So I included a couple slides here of, I don't want to just dwell on what's lacking or what's missing. I wanted to include a couple slides here showing sort of the vision of what Pelican Rapids, this already exists to some degree in Pelican Rapids, but what Pelican Rapids could have even more of. So here's a family enjoying a path or a trail on bikes, and we want to see more of this type of thing. We want infrastructure that accommodates more of this type of thing. And I think if you go to the next slide, I included this slide to kind of demonstrate that when we talk about the bicycle and pedestrian plan, and when we talk about making Pelican Rapids bicycle and pedestrian friendly generally, it's not just about infrastructure. It's also about promotion of biking, bike safety education. It's about encouraging people to obey the rules of the road better to keep everyone safer. This is a photo from a bike education event. And so obviously, I presume we're going to be talking a lot about infrastructure this morning, but I also wanted to remind people that it's not just about infrastructure. It's about other things like education and encouragement and promotion. Okay, I think if you go to the next slide. It's also about tourism and economic development. I think it's safe to say that the primary motivation for doing this bicycle and pedestrian plan for Pelican Rapids is to benefit the people who live in Pelican Rapids. We want to make it easier and safer for people in Pelican Rapids to bike and walk in their community. But there is also a tourism and economic development component of this. Back in 2014, I happened to be in downtown Pelican Rapids, and these three gentlemen, I met them at this corner, and I talked to them a little bit, and it turned out that they were biking from Fergus Falls to Fargo, and they were stopping in Pelican Rapids for a little bit. And I asked them if I could take their photo. They said yes. And so I took their photo. And I know that I don't live in Pelican Rapids. I live in Fergus Falls, but I've heard from people who live in Pelican Rapids that typically during the summer, they see quite a few people biking through town on their way to or from Fargo or some other destination. And certainly, I think it's in Pelican Rapids' economic interest to encourage this type of thing. And so making Pelican Rapids more bicycle friendly generally, it seems to me, helps attract more of these folks who stop at the coffee shop or at a restaurant to get some refreshment before they head on their way. And that, of course, helps the Pelican Rapids economy. So this is another side benefit of making Pelican Rapids more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. And next slide, please. So this is the final slide. Once again, thank you to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention for their sponsorship. SHIP is down at the bottom there. The Statewide Health Improvement Partnership, that's sort of the umbrella operation that Partnership for Health functions under. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you, Jill.
All right. So we're going to segue, I think, into discussion, and that it can take a few paths of, again, what ideas, and we can go back and look at the map if that's helpful, of like if people are talking about specific things. I have a few more poll questions just to kind of try to see folks and reactions. Patrick, there are a few questions in the chat box if you want to take a look. They're all from John Waller, and kind of some of them are moving into that implementation phase of like how is stuff funded, maintenance. And so that may be one place to start in terms of the purpose of the plan and that connection in, because I think he's getting into some really practical questions.
Sure. So, Jill, how about, I know you have a couple more poll questions that you
Want
want
me
to
to-
give us. So,
Yes.
how about if we start with those and then
Okay.
I'll address John's
Okay,
questions.
take a look
And
at them.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. All right, and then just a reminder, as we get into discussion, you can use the chat box, but also feel free to unmute yourself, speak up. So our next poll question, let me stop sharing results. All right, so now we're going to get into what more of a question around what would you like to see? And this is not an exhaustive list at all. So again, please feel free either to speak up or use the chat box. But what would support you to walk and bike more in Pelican Rapids? And so some of the answers kind of in the general sense are better connections with sidewalks and trails, separate spaces for people walking, biking, or driving. I've included a for example on this, but for example, sidewalks, specifically where folks are walking, and then a bike lane, and then a space where people are driving. That's just one example. More safety education for people who bike or walk, more safety education for people who drive. Programs that provide social support to walk and bike, so like a bike club or a church that has a walk group. Better lighting in the community, and then other. And again, there's lots of reasons. So again, asking folks to think about, and you can select up to 2. And if none of these resonate, if you're thinking about something else, please speak up or put it in the chat box. My feelings will not be hurt. And this list can get changed for future meetings too. I'm seeing I've got about 11 of 17 responses. But I know we got a couple folks on the phone. I'm counted in that 17 and I'm not going to vote. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. All right, so we got 12 responses. A lot of energy around better connections with sidewalks and trails. And then our second was the separate spaces. But then also some folks were recognizing some programming support. So, all right, helpful. When you selected, we're going to get to discussion. What does better connections, what would that look like? Or can you think of specific examples in your community? And this is one I don't have a poll question, so speak up. Or chat, use the chat feature.
Yeah, you're welcome to speak out verbally too. To make sure your mic is on and you can talk. That's fine. Or you can type it in through the chat. Don, I see you raising your hand.
Yeah, I think for me, there's a lot of gaps in the sidewalk system, and I'm not even going to use the word sidewalk. I'm going to shared use path is the way I look at all of it. But there's a lot of gaps in Pelican, and I think connect those or fill in them gaps, and then extend areas where there's no trail at all. To extend those areas where there could be biking is, I think, the biggest thing. But the gap filling is big. I've got some comments or some thoughts about the map too, and I don't know if you want them now or if you want to wait for a little bit. But
I think you can comment on the maps. Go ahead.
One of the things that when I look at the map, the first thing that I kind of notice is where you guys are laying out multi-use paths or even sidewalks, you're dead ending. Why not think about completing the loop, coming back like along the river trail, come back out to Highway 108 or in these other areas too. Think about, is there a way to close the loop so that you don't have to come back the same way you went, first of all, and then Pelican Rapids, and I'm sure I've kind of shared this with a number of people that are in this group, I think, but we did a safe routes to school study. And in that study, especially when you look at the southeast part of town, you walks, kind of going around from 10th Avenue and looping around. But in that study, there was a lot of discussion and even mapping that showed how you would get the residential community to kind of, when their kids are going to the elementary school, to kind of move in a certain direction, come to a common street where there would be a complete sidewalk down First Street that would take them to the elementary school. And it just seems like on this map, there's nothing in that whole residential area that reflects filling in sidewalk gaps or even putting in a sidewalk system to make pedestrian access, especially the elementary school kids walking to school, getting them access to the elementary school. That's my comments.
Thank you, Don. Anybody else have any comments? Feel free to speak up, or you can put comments in the chat box if you want to. What I'm going to do with the chat box, if it's okay with you, Jill, is we'll give a few more seconds here in case anybody wants to speak up verbally on any of this, and then I'll just run through everything that is in the chat box so far. So
Works for me.
okay. So let's look. I've been looking at what's in the chat box, and I'm just gonna take it from top to bottom as it appears on my own screen. So John Waller inputted some questions at the beginning, and so I'm just gonna tackle these as best I can. Now there are other people on the call who might know more about some of this than I do, or might want to correct something that I don't quite say correctly. And I welcome you to do that. We've got the mayor, we've got the city administrator. I think we've still got Tom Pace of MnDOT District 4 on the call here. So anybody who thinks that I'm leaving something out or that I don't quite have it right, feel free to chime in. But John's first question here is, who is going to pay for the initial cost of these paths, and who will pay for maintenance of these trails? So it depends on the trail segment. Let me start out by saying that the city of Pelican Rapids, as of April this year, has already received a $550,000 grant from MnDOT for the 59 and 108 project in 2024. Now, it has not yet been determined, as I understand it, how exactly that $550,000 is going to get applied. But I think that the committee that made that award to the city, I think one of their key interests was filling in the gaps for non-motorized transportation along 59 and 108 in town, particularly with an eye toward making it safer for people who don't have a car to get to the turkey plant. Some of the concept plan that we did in 2019 was motivated by making it safer, because there is, as I'm sure all of you who live in Pelican Rapids know, there is a gap for people trying to walk or bike to the turkey plant along 59, depending on where they live. And you see people walking to work or walking from work at the turkey plant, even in the middle of winter. And sometimes even as I drive past them, they look like they're in a pretty precarious situation. So I do think that some of that $550,000 is going to go toward that, but it's probably going to go toward other aspects of the concept plan. And I don't believe that where exactly that $550,000 goes has even been fully determined yet, but it's a great news that the city got that. So that's one source of funding for the trails. Now, certainly that $550,000 is not going to cover all the trails that are shown either on the map that you're seeing in the Zoom meeting or the maps that you can see on the City of Pelican Rapids webpage if you look at last year's concept plan for 59 and 108. So how are those other trail segments going to be paid for? I think the short answer is grants. And let me also emphasize that any trail segment that doesn't get built that is shown either on last year's concept plan or in this year's bicycle and pedestrian plan that does not get built as part of the 2024 project, for any of those trail segments, my understanding is there is no specific timeline for any of those. And some of those trail segments might take 10, 15 years to get built. Obviously, the city is working right now on the Pelican Rapids to Perm Trail, and I think that's going to happen sooner than that. But there may be other trail segments for that, even though we have a line on a map as part of the 2020 bike and pedestrian plan, there's no specific timeline or even cost associated with it right now, or cost estimate. And so we don't know how exactly it would get paid for, when it would get built. But I think there are various grant opportunities that Pelican Rapids has to apply for MnDOT grants, to apply for DNR grants, to apply for Federal Highway Administration grants. There are various, or even Department of Agriculture sometimes. And so I think they're going to be funded primarily through grants in terms of the initial construction. Now, the second part of John's question here was maintenance. And that depends on who ends up having jurisdiction over the trail. If it's I think in some cases, it may be the county that's responsible for maintenance. In some cases, it may be the city that's responsible for maintenance. For example, the Perm to Pelican Rapids Trail, or the Pelican Rapids to Perm Trail, I think my understanding is, and Don or Brent could correct me, but in terms of maintenance, when we're talking about the Pelican Rapids to Perm Trail, the segment of the trail that is within Pelican Rapids city limits may be the responsibility of the city of Pelican Rapids. But when we're talking about the rural stretches between Pelican Rapids and Perm that are not within an incorporated city, I think the responsibility for maintenance of those trails falls upon Otter Tail County. So the answer is it depends. Second part of John's question here is, with the Pelican Rapids City Code stating that sidewalks in residential areas are to be maintained and paid by the property owners, who will be responsible for the maintenance and cost of it? So in most cities, a sidewalk in front of your house is your responsibility to shovel in the winter and to clear of ice. Now, and I assume that it sounds like that is also the case in Pelican Rapids. There are a few cities where the city has actually also taken on that responsibility on a city level, and it's their public works crews out doing that. But those cities are the exception rather than the rule. So if, on the assumption that Pelican Rapids' current regulations are that it's the responsibility of the adjacent homeowner or the adjacent property owner to maintain the sidewalk, presumably, unless that ordinance is changed in Pelican Rapids, any new sidewalk in Pelican Rapids that gets built, let's say within the next 5 years, that ordinance would also apply. So I think what John's getting at here is, yes, if we build new sidewalks in Pelican Rapids, the maintenance of those sidewalks in terms of winter snow and ice clearance, and perhaps other maintenance, maybe if weeds start growing up in between the cracks or whatever, that, yes, that responsibility falls on the adjacent property owner, as I understand it. Then John had another question here.
Wait, hey, Patrick, can I just
Yes.
jump in?
Sure.
I think, John, your point in that question too is just knowing, like, current city ordinance says this. There are some examples of Minnesota communities, as they do a planning process, whether it's through safe routes or a bicycle pedestrian plan or a comprehensive plan, that they'll question some of those ordinances and have and end up changing it. And an example I'll give is the city of Red Wing. When they were doing, I think it ultimately was their comprehensive plan, but they were talking about winter maintenance. And so Red Wing took an approach where they did a pilot over winter. It happened to be a mild winter too, so that, it did affect the pilot. But looking at, does Public Works clear clear residential sidewalks as well, because they could do it faster and more efficiently, and did having that. And I think they were weighing kind of, yes, there is a cost, but they could also calculate out benefits. So I think one thing that this planning process can do is actually just spark, is that the correct ordinance? Is there a different, or is there an approach that's different for Pelican Rapids? I'll also say winter snow removal. I've been a part of some different pedestrian plans, and I've observed communities do them. And that whole issue around winter maintenance, no one's figured it out really. And, and everybody's kind of grappling with that. How do you have space, and also appreciate people are mobile throughout the year, and and cities struggle to keep up even just on the sidewalks that they're usually accountable for. But
Okay, I'll keep. Thank you, Jill, and I'll keep. I'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit, but
and Don, I think, is it Don that has his hand up?
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
I just
Go ahead,
want-
Don.
I just wanted to add to where John was at with his questions. John's on the planning commission, obviously, he stated that. And one of the things that they're looking at is updating the comprehensive plan. They're gonna start looking at that process. What you guys are doing here, the timing of it is kind of really good, because what comes out of this can be looked at as they start talking about the comprehensive plan. It's the planning commissions that's gonna start having them first conversations about, if we're going to put sidewalks in certain areas, who's going to be responsible, and does our sidewalk policy need to change? So it's John asking the question. It's John's the one that's going to be kind of start having the conversations surrounding this topic. How to pay for all that stuff. That's all part of the planning commission, city administration, city council actions.
Excellent.
There have been, so as you guys get deeper in this, and Patrick knows a lot, and I thought I saw Wayne Hurley had hopped on as well from West Central Initiatives. This is something where the Minnesota really is ahead of the curve in terms of the conversations around transportation and land use. And that's because of work Partnership for Health has been doing over the last 10 years, West Central Initiative's been doing, and other regions. So as you get into some of those questions about comprehensive plans and what it will look like for Pelican Rapids is going to be its own unique flavor. But there are some, we can try to kind of connect you with some of the other communities of what were the questions they were asking themselves, and where did they land, and if that helps you learn a lesson from them and not make that same mistake, or not have to reinvent the wheel too. So I get excited about comprehensive plans. All right, I'll dial it down. Sorry, Patrick.
No problem at all. So I'll try to pick up the pace here a little bit. Of course, new questions are coming in too, so I certainly don't want to neglect those either. But John asks here, how is or will the budget crunch in Minnesota due to COVID-19 affect the grants that we're planning to get for this project? So obviously, the coronavirus has had a major fiscal impact, not only on a state level, but also on a federal level. And it may, I don't think if Wayne's on the call too, he may want to comment on this, but it may very well have an impact on some of the grants that have traditionally been available for trails, for example. So far, I have not seen any specific instance. Nothing's reached my email inbox on either a state level or a federal level saying we have to cut this grant, or this grant is no longer available, or we don't have as much money to give out next year because of COVID-19. That may happen. So it's possible that some grant sources might get reduced, get cut, or even dry up entirely. So far, I haven't seen any evidence of that. If Wayne has, I invite him to speak up. But we'll just have to wait and see what happens with that. John also asks, with restrooms and such, because we do show restrooms on the maps, proposed additional restrooms. With restrooms and such, who is in charge of cleaning and maintaining them? So I'm going to, again, I don't live in Pelican Rapids. I'm going to take a wild guess here, and I invite the mayor or Don or anybody to chime in here. But if a new restroom is in a park, in a city park, I presume that it's the city parks department that ends up taking care of that. If we end up with a new restroom that's on city property that is not in a park, then I'm less confident how to answer that. I assume it would end up being public works or city maintenance or something, but I do think that ultimately it would fall upon the city to maintain a new restroom facility if it is on city property. And then there's Julie made a comment about sidewalks ending in the middle of nowhere, or sort of dead end sidewalks, and sort of expressing her disapproval of that. I do want to, obviously there are a lot of people on this call that are more familiar with Pelican Rapids than I am. When you look at those maps and you see a proposed segment of sidewalk that seems to end nowhere, I would just caution you with one thing. Go out there, if you're not, unless you're super intimately familiar with that neighborhood or that area. I would encourage you to go out and double check. Does the sidewalk line on our map truly end, truly dead end? Or does it represent a filling a gap, filling a connection that doesn't currently exist? Because there may be instances on the map where you see on the map a segment of sidewalk that seems to start nowhere or end nowhere, or seems to dead end, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe that line was intended to fill a gap, and there is actually sidewalk on each side. I don't know, but that would be worth double checking. And certainly I'm going to double check that myself. But I think that in the case where they're showing a sidewalk that truly does quote unquote dead end, I'm not the one who drew the line. It was somebody on the committee who drew the line. And in fact, I don't even know which specific individual drew which line, but I would suspect that they were thinking in terms of there's a specific, they're connecting 2 points here that they thought were traffic generators, where there's a lot of pedestrians here in point A that want to go to point B. And that's why it appears to quote unquote dead end.
Yeah.
So.
But Patrick, these are really helpful comments, because I think, and actually the next community meeting is Monday, the 29th. And that may be something we can add to the map or give context, so that there's a little, but because what the map doesn't reflect is actually existing, what's currently there. And so are these different things connecting in? So thank you all, because you guys are also kind of our guinea pigs, and kind of, this is the first foray out. So these comments are really helpful, both for the actual plan development, but informing the next meeting.
Yep. So then Luke gave us a comment that he likes the idea of closing gaps, especially in that sidewalks, especially in older neighborhoods, end abruptly. And Luke also encourages us to make things ADA compliant. Certainly any new infrastructure that gets built as a result of the bike and pedestrian plan, or as a result of last year's 59 and 108 concept plan, will be up to current ADA standards. Then Pamela says that she agrees with the comment about the loops. That is a feature that many bike riders and walkers benefit from, and fosters more connectivity between neighborhoods. So that comment has already been made this morning by several people, that they want to see loops. And I think we're certainly going to have additional meetings of our Bike and Pedestrian Plan Advisory Committee. And we will take this advice to heart. And I think when you see the next iteration of this map, it might take a couple months, but when you see the next version of this map, we're going to try to be more loop conscious in our sidewalks and trails. Then Luke says, walking and biking loops are great. As an example, Jackson, that being Jackson, Minnesota, has a bike loop that is fairly identifiable, but probably could be better educated for newcomers and visitors. So thank you, Luke. Luke also says, sorry, he has to leave early, but he hopes to join us for the next 2 meetings on Monday. And then John says, the Pelican Rapids Planning Commission is planning to work on the comprehensive plan. As Don said, this is good timing for us. Terrific. And Wayne, thank you, Wayne, for chiming in. Wayne says, I don't anticipate any changes to the $550,000 in federal funds that have been awarded to Pelican Rapids for their transportation alternatives project. That said, it's going to be up to Congress and MnDOT as to whether or not the funds will be distributed as planned. So Wayne brings up a very important caveat, which is that the $550,000 that has been awarded to Pelican Rapids, that is federal money that came from Congress. And alas, what Congress giveth, Congress can taketh away. Now, the thing is, the city is slated to receive that money in 2024. And Wayne is correct that in theory, even though Pelican Rapids has already been awarded that money, Congress could yank it away. Now, but I want to give you, but they could take it away from us, even though they've already awarded it to us between now and 2024. But I want to give you two words of reassurance on that. First, historically, they have not done that. And secondly, as I understand it, when there has even been a threat of that happening to any community in Minnesota, MnDOT, and when I make the statement, if Tom's still on the line here, I'm not offering this as a promise or a guarantee on behalf of MnDOT, okay? But my understanding is that historically, when it has appeared that Congress might yank away money from a Minnesota community that has already been awarded, MnDOT has been prepared to step in and make that community whole. So based on past experience, I think there is a chance that even if Congress yanks away part or all of that $550,000, that MnDOT, I think there's a pretty good chance, but not a guarantee, that MnDOT would step in and be the hero and make up the difference for the community. I don't think MnDOT wants to see communities hanging high and dry. So Rita says, sorry, she has to drop off. We understand that. People have meetings they have to go to. And then Pamela says here that it would be a valuable addition to the map to integrate graphically if paths continue in some way, shape, or form. Yes, we're going to work on that. It may be difficult for us in a short time frame to give you, let's say within a month, a map with a complete inventory of all existing trails and sidewalks in Pelican Rapids. If the city or if the county or if District 4 does not currently have that digitally in existence, that may be a pretty tall order for us to create that quickly, but we will do whatever we can in that regard as soon as we can. And with that, I have run through all the current questions. So,
All right, so I'm gonna put one final poll question to the group. Maybe, stop sharing results. All right, this is about potential improvements. And so I'm gonna launch this one and just again so what improvements would you most like to see for people walking and biking in Pelican Rapids? Again, you can select two. We have more sidewalks, more painted crosswalks, more on-street bike lanes, more off-street trails, more bike parking, free self-service bike repair stations, walking and biking safety curriculum for all ages, and other. And again, if you have an other, please share what you're thinking out loud or put it in the chat box. And I'll keep this open for a little bit longer. It looks like about half. Oh, numbers are going up. I love Minnesota. We have good voter turnout. People are willing to tell you what they think. It's great. I'm going to give about 5-10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end it. Are people excited to see the results here? You have no idea. It's blowing up for sure. All right, I'm ending the poll. And I'm going to share the results. Dun, dun, dun. More sidewalks. Yay. And so that had seven yeses. So 64%. And then more on-street bike lanes and off-street trails. Those were our second and third. Sorry, nobody is missing the bike repair station, Patrick. We all.
That's okay.
Everybody's got their tools.
So, well, yeah, either Pelican Rapids residents are very well equipped to maintain their own bikes, or people haven't realized yet how glorious those self-service bike maintenance stations are. They're just
Patrick, this is Deb speaking.
Sure.
I just want to comment about the self-serve bike stations. I don't think the community understands what benefit they would be because we haven't had them. And so I think a lot of us don't really think about it because we haven't had them. But they are a real benefit once we go down this path, so to speak, and we have more a more bike-friendly community. I think then those of us on the call and others would see that as important.
Thank you, Deb. And I live in Fergus Falls and Deb works in Fergus Falls. And so we're both very familiar with the fact that there are about 8 now of these self-service bike maintenance stations around Fergus Falls. And so go to Fergus Falls and check out the self-service bike maintenance stations if you're not familiar with what they look like.
And I'm sorry, I sounded flippant when I was pointing out
No, that's fine.
that it hadn't rated. And I did not mean that. I have benefited from those types of things because you have a tire pump. And so they are handy, and the more people you have out and about. So anyway, I apologize if that.
No problem. No, not at all.
Okay.
That's fine. No problem.
All right. Okay. So nobody marked other, but are there things, again, if you think about when you visited other communities here in Minnesota, in your region or anywhere, and you've done something there and think, oh, I wish we had that in Pelican Rapids, or are there things you currently have in Pelican Rapids that you want more of? Oh, there's a suggestion to take a picture of one of the repair stations and send it.
Yeah, we'll do that. And in fact, I
Good
think
idea.
For our Monday Zoom meetings next Monday, in my presentation, I'll include a photo of one of these bike repair stations. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, there is one final poll question. And I'm going to pull it up, and it actually gets into follow-up. And so, wait, whoops, here we go. All right, so this question is, what are you willing to do to help implement the plan? And so it's a little bit, I don't have on here, serve on the Planning Commission, which I'm going to add that as an option, or volunteer, serving within your municipal structure. But getting a sense, and you can pick as many of these as you want, but talk to friends or family about this meeting and invite them to the next session. There is 2 on June 29th, an afternoon and an early evening, volunteering to help implement the plan. And that gets into if there's a robust discussion about the bathrooms, and like we want to have a spot where people riding through can use bathrooms. So getting into those questions of, well, where should it be? How can we use it? The folks in Alexandria, their Downtown Business Association took on the issue of public bathrooms and kind of what they were going to do because they wanted to see more people coming downtown, and that was a barrier. And so that, it's not always, it can be surprising who's interested in that issue. So, all right, so volunteering, advocate to city and elected officials to implement the plan, and other. And if you're saying other, put it in the chat box. I'm like a broken record over here. Or speak up. Wayne is happy to provide technical assistance for the plan, and the folks at West Central Initiative have been supporting communities in your region for years and years, and are often who we look to for seeing how things are happening, especially across the state, but also, making things work and helping create and support really vibrant communities. So thanks, Wayne. Oh, and I'll end polling. Sorry, I'm sitting on the results, you guys. I got distracted. But many of you have said you are going to talk to friends or family. So please, that's great. And then also advocate to city and county elected officials. So also great.
Thank you so much. And please do whatever you can to help spread the word about our 2 meetings on Monday. even though the agenda for these 3 meetings is basically going to be the same, I suspect these 3 meetings are going to turn out to be quite different in terms of what specific topics we end up getting into, because it all depends on who shows up. So I also want to invite all of you to join the Monday meetings too. That's great. We love repeat business. So, and yes, Jill, thank you very much. Most of you got this from me in an email. These are the Zoom links to all 3 meetings. These are also the phone numbers for all 3 meetings. If you the phone numbers are toll free. If you join us by phone, you've got to a recorded voice will ask you to enter the meeting ID number, and then that's the number that you enter in. So you're welcome to join us by phone too. And yeah, great. Come to the meetings. I think, and help promote them too. I mean, forward the email with the flyer to your friends, neighbors, relatives, coworkers, whatever. And people don't have to live within Pelican Rapids city limits to be valuable participants in this. Anybody in the Pelican Rapids area, and I define that pretty loosely, is welcome to join the conversation and help us out. So, and Jill just sent the link in the chat box, which is awesome too. So.
And I know more now, but when we were setting these up, I set them up as 3 distinct meetings. So they are different links if you get really into the reading of the code, and the meeting ID numbers are different. So just let folks know, if you happen to save the one from this one, if they try to use this meeting's link on Monday, it won't work.
Yep, exactly. Each meeting has their own link and their own meeting ID number if you call in by phone. So where are we at on the agenda, Jill? What do we got left? We did all the poll questions?
I did all the poll questions.
All right.
Yeah.
I don't want to neglect anybody in the chat box, so I'm going to take one more look at the chat box here and see if what other questions we've received here. So Wayne gave us a comment in the chat box. I agree with Deb, and would add that bike repair stations are very useful for long distance cyclists. Good point, Wayne, which Pelican Rapids sees quite a few of in the summer months. They're one more easy way to build a bike friendly community. Yeah. So I think in the Monday meetings, once I show all of you what these bike stations look like, you're going to love them. And I think you're going to want at least one in Pelican Rapids. They're great. I think Wayne can put it in the chat box, but Wayne, I think currently we've got, do we have 8 of them in Fergus Falls? We got a bunch. So, Don asks for photos of these bike repair stations. And so I will certainly do that. Don, I'll send you some photos of some of these bike repair stations. But I think anybody out there, if you have a bike repair station in our region that you particularly like, go ahead and take a photo of it and give it to Don. Wayne offers his technical assistance for plan implementation. Thank you, Wayne. Pamela says, I think a robust visual audit of many of these features being discussed would be most welcome. What are other communities doing? Bike repair stations, bike racks, public restrooms geared to walkers, bikers, water fountains geared to waters, bikers. The information would be useful as Pelican Rapids makes design decisions going forward. So I'll tell you what, I'm now inspired. I think the 2 Monday meetings that we're going to have, the 2 Monday Zoom meetings, I'm probably going to alter my presentation a little bit more than just throwing in a bike maintenance station photo. Now I'm getting inspired to follow up on Pam's advice here and add some photos to the presentation of some of these other facilities. And what I will try to do for our 2 Monday Zoom meetings is include photos of these facilities that we're talking about in our region, in Pelican Rapids or Parker's Prairie, maybe Alexandria, wherever, Detroit Lakes, and so that people, I do this for a living. Wayne does this for a living. We think about this stuff all day long, but I know some people don't, and so I think some visuals would help out. So that great idea there, Pamela. Don apologizes for having to leave, let's see. I think that was the comments. Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Yeah. And maybe Jill, do you mind hanging out for maybe a couple more minutes just in case anybody wants to say something or throw something into the chat box? And if we come up dry, then we'll call it a meeting. But anybody's willing to, now's your chance to either speak up or add something in the chat box. Operators are standing by. And let me just thank everybody once again for participating. I know some people have already had to leave, but let me thank everybody for participating. And also, once again, remind you, we are recording this meeting, and this meeting should be available online soon in at least 2 locations. And
In a week. For me, it'll be in a week.
Okay.
Christopher may be faster.
Sure. And when we get those up and running, I will email everybody and say, hey, if you want to relive the glory of this meeting, here's where you click to watch the video.
Yeah. John, don't show us your credit card. All of a sudden I'm going to commit some fraud there.
We may have to, I'm sure Chris is
blur that out.
Right, exactly. Digitize the credit card spot. I'm sure Chris is sophisticated enough to know how to do that. So.
All right.
Well, if we're not getting anything in the chat, Becker, Clay, Ottertail, and Wilkin counties, I should acknowledge that also here from Partnership for Health is Jason Bergstrand and Rory Beal, and also our Minnesota Green Corps member, Katie Katuski. So we work with communities in Becker, Clay, Ottertail, and Wilkin counties to improve health of the communities in various ways. We are here because last fall we received a generous sponsorship from Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota's Center for Prevention, which Jill is from, to do a bicycle and pedestrian plan for the city of Pelican Rapids. And I will get more into the details of that in a moment. But first, Jill is going to give us all a primer on Zoom and specifically what features we need to use for purposes of this meeting.
Yeah. Well, so again, welcome. And I'm hoping folks, one of the plus sides to when we've been staying home more and trying to connect with folks, more and more people have used Zoom. So I'm hopeful folks are familiar. If you are not, though, I'm just going to point out, one, if you scroll over the Zoom window, you'll notice at the bottom toolbar a chat icon and the word chat. Click on that. That's the chat box. And that's one way to pose questions or make a comment, and it's going to come up as we use some poll questions. And that's the other feature. We're going to start using poll questions just to, again, kind of spark questions, conversations, and inform. The purpose of this meeting, or the kind of the general flow, we'll start with a couple questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, and he's got a basic or presentation. It's not identical to what we did a week ago. Actually, we had some really constructive, helpful feedback. So there have been a couple things added to that presentation. And then we'll get back to some questions, and we open it up where it's a chance for you all to provide input and talk about what you want to see in Pelican Rapids. So there we go. So I'm going to start. So first, this is not a political question. Well, maybe it is a political question. You don't know. I'm going to launch our first poll question, and you're going to have a chance to answer, and you'll just get the gist of it. And so our first poll question, lutefisk. It is the food of my people. Something I'd like to try, or I would try, not for me. What is lutefisk? So please answer. And you see how easy that is. You click. This one, you'll only get to pick one answer. Some poll questions will have, you can pick 2. All right. I'm going to end polling. Well, everyone, not surprisingly, not for me, took the day. Although coming in second, it is the food of my people. And in full disclosure, it is both the food of my people and not for me. So anyway, so that's just great. Oh, I should say, I didn't share the results. That's my bad. So you can see, so as we have questions, I then will share the results. So, all right. So I am now going to stop sharing. So now we have a serious question that we want to check in with folks to just get a sense of who's on the call and kind of what your experience is. So the first one is specifically about walking. And all right. So the first question around walking is, I walk or roll, and roll implies maybe it's the use of a wheelchair or some sort of mobility device, but I walk or roll too. And you can pick your top 2 of these. One is support my physical health, have fun, get to and from work, socialize, run errands, support my mental health, be in nature, or other reasons. And if you select other, great, but please tell us what it is in the chat box. We'll just take a little bit longer. I'm noting a comment in the chat box. Somebody knows how to cook lutefisk. So with our wrap up time, we will use that. All right, I'm going to end the poll. Looks like voting slowed down. So let me share the results. So what we're hearing or seeing, 94% of you marked at least one of your choices as support my physical health. So, and that was very similar actually to the first session we had last week. And then what is also, but what interesting is the second nature, and that's the second most with 59%. And then we have support my mental health, and then the others each have some different level of interest. So that's great. All right, I'm going to stop sharing these, and now we've got a couple questions about biking. And hold on one second. And 2 questions are going to show up. First one is just to get a sense of, in the last 2 weeks, how often did you ride a bike? 1 to 3 days, 4 to 6 days, 7 to 9 days, 10 or more, or I didn't ride a bike. And if you, and that you just select one, and then we have the same question about biking. I ride a bike too, and that responses are all the same. And again, we just ask that you select the top 2 for yourself. And if you mark other, please let us know in the chat box. You'll sense a theme. All right, gonna give a few more seconds here to see if there's any. It looks like we're at 64% have voted, so maybe some people are thinking. I know I've seen a couple folks are driving. Oh, so they're less hard to vote at this point. All right, so I'm gonna end the poll and I'll share results. So first one we have, so this is fun. So spoiler, last week's session, I think on the people on the call, no one biked regularly. It was, everybody had marked I didn't bike in the last 2 weeks. So it's nice. This one, we have a little bit more diversity of experience. So some that have biked, 44% is the highest in the 1 to 3 days, and others biking a bit more. And then one passionate rider, love it, glad you're here. But we also have folks who don't bike at all. So that's great. It actually helps make the plan richer because it's a diverse set of experiences. And then similar in terms of why people are riding. So supporting physical health was also the most popular, but having fun increased and surpassed be in nature. So that's, yeah, so there's a range of reasons folks do things. Noteworthy, oftentimes in biking, we're going to see that some people are using it to get to and from work, which I think for folks who don't ride, you forget that as a form of transportation. So are there, and we had one comment, one person commented that they take a short ride when they work from home as well. So other reactions or thoughts, anything surprising for folks?
You can either type something in the chat box or feel free to speak up. That's fine too. Yeah. If you're going to speak, unmute your mic, right? Yeah.
Yes. That's the one tricky part.
Yep.
All right. Well, not hearing anything. I'll just add, again, there was some diversity in answers, which I think last week we maybe saw not quite that same range. So it's nice, again, good for the input in terms of the plan. So, all right, Patrick, I'm going to hand it over to you and I'll get your slides up.
Super.
Here we go. You ready, Patrick?
Sure. Is there like a full screen mode or whatever?
Yeah,
or
hang
is
on,
that
sorry.
okay? No problem.
Yeah,
Okay, terrific.
there we go.
Awesome. Okay, so once again, I'm Patrick Hollister with Partnership for Health. Our logo is on the left side of the screen there, obviously. On the right side is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention. This is a joint effort, not only by us two, but also by other entities such as the City of Pelican Rapids and MnDOT and West Central Initiative and a Green Corps and a host of others. And we appreciate everybody's participation in this. So as Jill said, this is a slightly different presentation than what I gave last week. And I'm probably also going to be a little bit more concise when I go through the slides here than I was last week. So we can go to the next slide. So last year, a lot of you know, we had a concept plan process for 59 and 108. That's because MnDOT District 4 is going to reconstruct 59 and 108 within Pelican Rapids city limits in 2024. And that was pre-COVID-19, so we were able to meet in person, and we had 3 in-person meetings at Lake Region Electric Co-op in 2019. And we had really good turnout. And as you can see in this photo, the mayor is up at the front giving the introductory comments before we dive into the nitty-gritty of 59 and 108. So next slide. Hopefully a lot of you participated in that process last year. So the another thing that we did last year was, and I have to give Kate Martinez a lot of credit for this. She helped me fill out and apply for a Bikeable Community Workshop. And we were awarded a Bikeable Community Workshop by Minnesota Department of Health, MnDOT, and Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. And so we held that workshop at the Pelican Rapids Library on June 11th, 2019. That involved both an outdoor portion where we were all out on bikes and an indoor portion where we were in the classroom. And as part of the Bikeable Community Workshop, we had visiting guest experts from Minnesota Department of Health, MnDOT, Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota, and then also Wayne helped us a lot from West Central Initiative, and we also had a Green Corps member, Scott Schwant from Minnesota Green Corps. Next slide. So now that was last year. Now I want to talk about what we're doing this year. So last year during the 59 and 108 concept plan process, I got comments from some people saying, this is great that, you know, you're already thinking about what to do on 59 and 108 in 2024, but we have improvements that we would like to see for people biking and people walking in other parts of town, not just 59 and 108, other streets, other neighborhoods. Can we do anything about that? And so that inspired me last year around, I think it was September, to apply for a Catalyst sponsorship from Blue Cross Blue Shield Center for Prevention. And very fortunately, we were awarded that sponsorship. And so that's how Blue Cross is helping to fund this effort. So we decided, okay, for 2020, we're going to do a bike and pedestrian plan for the entire city. And so, of course, we put a committee together. This photo was taken at our first and unfortunately only pre-coronavirus meeting. This was in February of 2020 at City Hall. And we got everybody together. And next slide, please. After we talked about the bike and pedestrian plan for probably about 45 minutes, and then people grabbed Sharpie markers and they drew on some aerial photos that I brought. I just asked everybody, please draw any bike or pedestrian infrastructure that you would like to see added to Pelican Rapids. Please draw it on this map or this aerial photo please label it so that later I know what you were trying to tell me. And so they did, and it was great. I got a lot of good information that evening from our committee. So next slide, please. So what I did with that information is I had it digitized. This is a GIS map that was put together by Apex. Thank you, Bob and Apex. And so the information that people drew with Sharpies on the map, we put in GIS form. And I know this might be a little bit hard to tell what's what at this scale. So what I did later was I broke this map into fourths, and I'll show you that in a moment. But I just wanted to do a quick run through. In the bottom right there, you can see the legend or the key for the map. And very simply, the green line means sidewalk. The light blue line means multi-use. In other words, a multi-use path. So that would be, they are commonly referred to as bike trails, although multi-use path is probably the more technically correct term because they're not just for bikes, they're also for pedestrians. So for example, you already have a multi-use path running from the elementary school down to Lake Region Electric Co-op. So that's an example of a multi-use path. So that's what the light blue lines are. And then the dark blue line simply says bike. That is some sort of bike facility, although at this point in the process, we did not attempt to specify exactly what kind of bike facility that would be. And there are various types of bike facilities, which I will show in some of the slides that I added since last Tuesday. And then the next column of symbols there. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. The next column of symbols there. When you see a rectangle with a bike inside it, that means a bike rack. When you see a square with a person drinking from a water fountain, that means some sort of water fountain or hydration station. There are some squares with 3 symbols in them, and I still don't know what exactly those symbols are supposed to be, but the square with the 3 symbols is a bike repair station, and I have a really good photo of that later on. The sort of traditional male and female symbols, that's restrooms, and then what looks like a UPC sticker that you would somebody would scan at Target or Walmart. That's a painted crosswalk. That's one of the comments that we got a lot of last year was people wanted more painted crosswalks. So, all right, next slide. So what I did was, I hope this helps a little bit. I broke the map into fourths and asked Apex to make GIS maps of each of the fourths, which they did. So this is, I used 59 and 108 to sort of define the quarters of town. So this is northwest. Next slide. This obviously is northeast. Next slide. This is southeast. Next slide. And this is southwest. Now, don't worry. Definitely, when we get into discussion, if anybody wants us to go back to these maps, we're happy to go back to these maps. But I just wanted to show them to you briefly right now. So next slide. I asked Don and Bob for whatever they had in regards to a sidewalk inventory for Pelican Rapids, and they sent me this. I believe that this is a map out of the city's Safe Routes to School plan, which was in the neighborhood of 2011, 2012, I think is the date of this map. I know the lines there might be a little bit hard to read on your screen, but this was the sidewalk inventory as of 2011, 2012. Okay, next slide. We are also interested in the demographics of Pelican Rapids. Obviously, all of you who live in Pelican Rapids know that relative to its size, there is a large immigrant population in Pelican Rapids, the 2 largest groups being Somalis and Latinos, Latinos being mostly Mexicans or Guatemalans. And because this happens, we happen to be in summer of 2020. Unfortunately, the most recent census data that we have access to is 2010. The 2020 census data, which is being collected right now, will not be available until summer 2021. So we went back to 2010, and once again, Apex was kind enough to make these maps for me. What I was interested in is where are these two immigrant populations concentrated geographically? And so the red is the area, it's a color-coded map. The red is the area of greatest concentration of the respective immigrant group. I would imagine that if next summer we made 2020 versions of these maps, they wouldn't look dramatically different than this, but 2010 is the most recent data we have for this. So, okay, next. So Kate Martinez last year was on our 59 and 108 concept plan committee, and she was very interested in equity or health equity in the Pelican Rapids community, specifically with respect to 59 and 108. And what I mean by that is, as I think probably everybody on the call knows, right now 59 and 108 are not optimal. They're not the best they could be for walking and biking. And there are people who live in the community, particularly immigrants, but not only immigrants, but people in the community who work for the turkey plant that end up walking to and from the turkey plant all year round, even in the middle of winter, even under ice and snow conditions. And unfortunately, for some portions of the journey, there is no sidewalk, there is no bike path. There's basically nothing to accommodate them. Kate wanted to take some pictures of some scenarios that she thought were definitely less than ideal. She happened to be out walking one day on this portion of 108, and this was a family trying to navigate 108. Now, obviously, this is winter. Fortunately, at this moment, the roads were clear, but we see this, people in Pelican Rapids see this type of thing even when the roads are not clear. And she asked the family if it was okay to take their photo. They said, fine, you can take our photo. She said, do you mind if you're identifiable in the photo? They said, no, we don't care if we're identifiable in the photo. Nevertheless, when she took the photo, afterwards, she decided to cover up the two faces there that are visible from the camera to preserve the family's anonymity. So to this day, I don't know who this is, but I think this is a very dramatic and telling photo. So next. Kate also took this photo. This is a portion of 59 with, again, no sidewalk, no trail. And here's somebody pushing a stroller trying to navigate 59. So there are definitely less than ideal and I would say inequitable situations on 59 and 108 and elsewhere in town in its current condition. So next slide, please. I didn't just want to show you photos of what's lacking. I wanted to show you a couple of inspirational photos. So here is a family out biking on a trail. And wouldn't it be lovely to be able to bike like this all the way from, for example, Pelican Rapids to Maplewood State Park? Well, the good news is that's on the way. But we want more of this. We want more facilities for families to be able to recreate together, to get exercise together, for people to bike safely separated from the traffic. Next slide, please. So I put this photo in. This is a bike rodeo. A bike rodeo is a bicycle safety education event for kids. I put this photo in just to make the point that the Pelican Rapids becoming a more bicycle and pedestrian friendly community, and indeed the bicycle and pedestrian plan for Pelican Rapids is not just about infrastructure. I know I've talked a lot about infrastructure so far, but it's also about education. It's about encouragement. It's about promotion. It's about organized bike activities. There's all kinds of things. Individual employers can do things to encourage their employees to bike to work, incentivize their employees to bike to work, or their customers. So there's all kinds of sort of non-infrastructure things that are involved also. And certainly one of those is bike safety education, both for motorists and for people riding bikes and pedestrians for that matter, and both for adults and kids. So next slide, please. We are doing this bicycle and pedestrian plan for Pelican Rapids primarily to benefit the people who live in Pelican Rapids. But I do want to also point out that there is a tourism and economic development benefit to Pelican Rapids becoming more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. I took this photo back in 2014. I happened to be in Pelican Rapids, and these three gentlemen were taking a rest. They were biking from Fergus Falls to Fargo. And I asked them if I could take their photo, and they said, fine. So I know that, and maybe COVID-19, maybe coronavirus has made this summer, has altered the frequency with which you see this type of thing this summer. But certainly in a normal summer where we don't have a global pandemic, I know that people in Pelican Rapids see quite a bit of this type of thing in the summer. There are people biking through Pelican Rapids, either on their way to Fargo. They're either going north, south, or east, west. And it's in Pelican Rapids' own interest, in my opinion, that it become a more bicycle and pedestrian friendly community, and that it become known as such, because that entices people from all over the state, all over the country, and indeed all over the world to bike through Pelican Rapids. I live in Fergus Falls, and we get, Wayne's on the call too. Wayne and I know that there are people who bike through Fergus Falls that are like biking cross country. There are some people that aren't quite that ambitious that are biking cross state that come through Fergus Falls, and I know some of them come through Pelican Rapids too. So this is good tourism. This is good business for Pelican Rapids. So next slide. So when we had this Zoom meeting last Tuesday, and by the way, those of you who are on the call that joined us last Tuesday, thank you. And thank you for being a repeat customer. When we had this Zoom meeting last Tuesday, some people wanted me to add some photos to my presentation here with examples of infrastructure. So I'm going to show you a bunch of sample photos of infrastructure from other communities. But first, I'm starting with this photo because I do want to acknowledge that right here in Pelican Rapids, already you do have some very nice bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure. This has to be the coolest pedestrian bridge in all of Otter Tail County. And I love it. And I got to confess something. I started working at, my wife and I moved up to Fergus Falls from the Twin Cities in February of 2010. And I got involved with Detroit Lakes a long time before I started getting involved in Pelican Rapids. So I would say that 2010, 2011, 2012, maybe even 2013, I must have driven along 59 in Pelican Rapids hundreds of times, and I never knew about the existence of this bridge. And then one day, for whatever reason, we actually stopped in town and started walking around, and lo and behold, there it was. And so I know that one of the things, this is just a side note, but one of the things that's going to happen with the 59 and 108 project is some work over the bridge, or work on the bridge is going to happen, maybe even a replacement of the bridge. And some interest has already been expressed in, can something be done with the bridge so that even the Cavalier driver through Pelican Rapids can be more aware of the Big Pelican and some of the other features of Pelican Rapids. I don't know if somebody, no matter what you do to the bridge, it might be that somebody driving through Pelican Rapids just physically can't see this bridge, but still, I think this is a real hidden gem in Pelican Rapids. Okay, next slide. So I'm going to start with a very basic, forgive me for being obvious, but this is a sidewalk. And we all know what a sidewalk looks like. This particular photo was taken, I think, in like 2011 or 2012. And I did notice that we've got Karen Nitskorsky on the call here. And Jill, maybe I'm mixing you up with Karen, but I seem to recall that, Jill, that you and Lisa Bender attended this ribbon cutting. Am I right on that?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So did you take this photo?
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe Karen took the photo, but or Jill or Lisa took the photo, maybe. But here, this is a ribbon cutting for a new sidewalk in Detroit Lakes, which this occurred in 2012. Detroit Lakes got funding for new sidewalks through a Safe Routes to School infrastructure grant. The guy holding the big scissors is Matt Brank, the mayor, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to this event, but it's a cool photo. So anyway, this is a sidewalk. Okay, next slide. This is a bike lane. This is now this is what there are various types of bike facilities, and I've got I think 3 examples of kind of the most broad categories. So this is what we call an on-street bike lane. This at the time this photo was taken, this bike lane was brand new. It is on College Way in Fergus Falls. You can see the old McDonald's in the back of the photo there before they knocked it down and built the new McDonald's. And this had just been freshly painted. So you can still see the spray paint under the bike symbol. And I can't read it, but I think what it means is put the bike symbol here. And so now sometimes with on-street, in this case, because parking was not viewed by the city of Fergus Falls as a critical need along this segment of College Way, they just went ahead and put the bike lane right up against the gravel, right up against the edge of the road. And there is no on-street parking on this segment of College Way. Sometimes bike lanes are between the on-street parking and the driving lane. And sometimes people put the parking lane between the bike lane and the driving lane. So there's various configurations, but in this case, there is no on-street parking. So next slide, please. So this is also a bike lane. This is an above the curb bike lane. This photo is from Richfield, inner ring suburb of Minneapolis. And this is actually pretty new. When you put a bike lane, this is bicyclists are supposed to be on this in one direction. There is a bike lane in the opposite direction on the opposite side of the street. And the darker concrete is the bike lane. The lighter concrete is the sidewalk. And so the theory here, at least, is that the bikes are segregated from the pedestrians, and the bicyclists are only supposed to go one way. If they want to go the other way, they're supposed to cross the street. I'm saying supposed to because not everybody uses infrastructure in the way it's intended. But when you put a unidirectional bike lane, a one-way bike lane above the curb like this, it is often referred to as a cycle track. You can also call it an above the curb bike lane. That's fine. Okay, next slide. So this is a Sharrow, and Katie took this photo. I think this photo is somewhere either in Fargo or Moorhead on a residential street. And a Sharrow, we have several of these now on some streets in Fergus Falls. And I'm going to try to really briefly explain what a Sharrow means, because I think a lot of people, even people who live in towns where they've got them now, still aren't quite up to speed on what they mean. So the Sharrow indicates, first of all, it's an encouragement to the bicyclist to take this route. In other words, the city is saying, if you want to bike from neighborhood A to neighborhood B, we're suggesting that you bike this route. The Sharrow is also a signal to the motorist, hey, be on the lookout. This is a road that a lot of bikes ride, or a lot of people ride on bikes. Now, but that Sharrow also has a more specific meaning, which is that notice, for example, now they don't, on this residential street, like a lot of residential streets, they don't differentiate the east, I'll say east-west, I don't know where it is, but they don't differentiate the eastbound lane from the westbound lane. There's no striping, right? But this is a two-way street. In fact, if you look really carefully, you can see kind of a smudge behind the big Sharrow. That's a little Sharrow in the opposite direction. It's not literally smaller, but it's smaller on your screen. Anyway, if you look off in the distance, you can see sort of a blur of a Sharrow in the opposite direction. So this is a 2-lane street. And this Sharrow looks to me like it's basically in the middle of the lane. So it's not just an encouragement for people to bike down this street. The exact position of the Sharrow within the lane matters. This position of this Sharrow is telling the bicyclists, not only should you bike down this street, you should bike right here. In other words, you should bike right down the middle of that symbol. In other words, you can take the full lane. And it's also a warning to the or an advisory to the motorists that they can do the same. Okay, next, please.
Oops. Oh, sorry.
So this is a multi-use path, or otherwise known as a bike trail. And this is this happens to be the ribbon cutting for the Glendalough Trail. This was around 2016, I'm going to say. And that's obviously, a lot of you have been to Glendalough State Park near Battle Lake. That's a very pristine setting. But you can also have a bike trail or a multi-use path in a very urban setting. Like, for example, you've got a multi-use path already running from your school to Lake Regional Electric Co-op, much more urban setting than this. Okay, next. So bike racks. I want to talk a little bit about bike racks. This is a this is a run-of-the-mill bike rack. It's commercially available. Lots of companies make this. This particular type of bike rack is known as a wave rack. And so here are some people using a wave bike rack. Next slide. But guess what? This is also a bike rack. In Fergus Falls, I think this was around 2017. There was a year in Fergus Falls where some local organizations sort of had an education campaign about monarch butterflies. And inspired by that, Wayne, you can see Wayne there with the bicycle pin next to me. Wayne and some other folks thought, wouldn't it be cool to make some bike racks that look like butterflies, and also some bike racks that look like prairie grass. You can see that on the left there. And kind of symbolize the symbiosis between butterflies and prairie grass. And so Wayne and some other folks got a grant from Lake Region Arts Council in Fergus Falls to make butterfly and prairie grass bike racks and put them up around town. And so here we are at the library for the ribbon cutting for the butterfly and prairie grass bike racks. And next slide. Here are the two artists that made the bike racks, Carl Zachman and Naomi Schliessman, at work making one of the butterfly bike racks. And thank you, Wayne, for providing this photo. Next slide. And at long last, here is the self-service free 24-hour bike maintenance station. There are lots of companies that make them. They look different. They all look different from each other, but this is a really popular one. Notice, so there's a couple things I want you to notice about this. Number one, it's bolted to the concrete. There are vertical bars at the top where you can mount your bike, obviously, as this guy's doing. Usually there is a canister inside the bike stand where there are tools on cables, and you can see that. Then very often, sometimes it's physically attached to the bike stand, the bike maintenance stand. Sometimes it's a physically separate object that even gets bolted down separately, but there is a tire pump. And if you look closely, this guy is putting air into his front tire. So there is a bike fix-it station, free 24-hour self-service. I believe that Fergus Falls now has, Wayne, I'm embarrassed, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's either 8 or 10 of these around town. So, and there's one, for example, in the parking lot of what used to be Shopko, right at Cascade and Lincoln, if you want to go see one. There's also one at the Fergus Falls Library. Okay, next. I also did want to say one thing about handicapped accessibility and ADA compliance. So the guy in this photo with his back to us is Todd. He is from MnDOT Central Office. He is their main ADA compliance officer. I don't think that's his job title, but effectively that's what he does. So he goes around or that's one of the things he does. He goes around the state, and when MnDOT does a project, like for example, they're going to do Pelican Rapids 59 and 108 in 2024. He visits before the project and gives his recommendations and advice on how to make, at a bare minimum, the project ADA compliant, but ideally go even beyond the minimum requirements of ADA and make it as handicapped accessible as possible. Guess what town we're in, and type your guess in the chat box, and then later on we'll see who is right. So what town is this photo in? Okay, next slide. So then that's the end of the presentation. And I just once again want to thank Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention for the sponsorship and also the statewide health improvement partnership. Okay.
All right. Well, to pivot us into some discussion, a couple things. I did do a little host privilege and muted folks if I was hearing some background sound, just because that makes it easier. So just a reminder, we're going to open it up for discussion. So you may want to unmute your line, and that's okay. If you're someplace where it's a little noisy, and that could be, you may have kids in the background, you may be someplace public, just use your judgment there. But a reminder for discussion, you can also use the chat box. To start with the discussion, I'm going to do another poll question. Are you guys ready? Are you excited? Because I mean, the last time, whoops, that's the old question. Sorry, hang on. All right, so I'm going to go to, so we wanted to ask a question of what kind of support would help you be able to walk or bike more in Pelican Rapids. So the question is, which of the following would support you to walk and bike more in Pelican Rapids? And again, you can select up to 2. And so separate spaces for people walking, biking, or driving. So that might look like that, the more elaborate bike lane where there was a space for a bike, space for someone walking on the sidewalk, and clearly a traffic lane, but separated spaces. Better connections with sidewalks for trails, more safety education for people who bike or walk, more safety education for people who drive. Better lighting in the community, winter maintenance of the sidewalks. Patrick, I forgot to tell you, I added that as one of our options.
Great.
And other. And again, if you are typing other, please put something in the chat box so we know what you're thinking. It really does help. So I'm going to leave this open. Take your time, think about it. Part of why Patrick added the photos of the different types of treatment so you could think, kind of have something visual to think about. All right, right now it's telling me we're at about 15 of the 26 folks on the line. Patrick and I don't vote. I think Katie probably isn't going to vote too, so I'm not going for 100%, but I'll give a couple more minutes before, or not a couple more minutes. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And let me share the results. So you're hopefully seeing those. So separate spaces got 63%. Better connections, I think, is the next. And safety education for both people who walk or bike. More folks for people who drive. And then winter maintenance. And then in the other, we have a comment from the walking away from major highways, which are next to schools. So an updated safe route study is or kind of a concentration there. So for the folks who were thinking about separate spaces, was there something that resonated with you? I'm going to pause. Or what are you thinking about, or where are you thinking about?
Feel free to unmute your mic and speak up, or you can type it in the chat box. Either one is fine.
Okay, this is Judy, and I guess to me, it's more the Main Street area. I know when you had the bike thing last summer. We all went together down the highway and we were told we could take over the lane, but I don't think any of us really felt very safe or comfortable doing that. And if we were by ourselves, especially. So I think specifically for sure, a separate spot for biking down Main Street.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
Others? Out of curiosity, for those that we didn't talk about winter maintenance specifically, or we weren't able to go as deep, I guess, on the last call. So what are folks thinking about with winter maintenance? What does that look like for you?
Well, this is Judy again. I'm the only
Go
one
for it,
talking.
Judy. That's okay.
I don't think we have a problem with winter maintenance. I think they do a really good job on the streets. The sidewalks, I guess, are up to the individual property owners to do. And I think most people walk on the streets anyway, so.
All right, for folks who selected it then, though, for what would be more supportive, what would you like to see? Thank you, Judy, for speaking up. I appreciate you stepping up, but there's no wrong answers. This is just kind of that visioning process.
Hey, Jill, this is Deb.
Thanks, Deb.
And I chose that, not partially because, well, I think the city does. I don't live in town, so I'm going to preface with that. However, I have family members who do, and so I'm in town frequently and I'm at their home frequently. And while I do believe the city does a good job with our streets in the winter months, it has a lot to do with when are you able to get out and get the snow removed from the streets. And at least a couple of residential areas that I frequent during the winter months, they're really not safe places for people to walk outside in the winter. There's ice on the streets. Some of it is what it is because we have winter in Minnesota and you cannot get the snow off fast enough and get it all the way down to the tar. You just can't. So places that maybe were designated for walking in the winter for people who want to walk outside that are maybe cleared a little better or closer to the surface so that they're not as treacherous as some of the streets can be. That's part of the reason why I chose that, is if there were designated areas where that snow got removed a little bit better for people to be able to traverse outside on city streets in the winter or sidewalks, whichever. And Judy's right. City sidewalks are the responsibility of the property owners. And so that's a little hard because if a property owner doesn't shovel, I don't know, Brent, maybe you could speak to, does the city come and do it and charge them, or it just doesn't happen? It's a small town, so makes it a little more difficult.
Your Honor, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, excuse me. Our sidewalk policy is pretty lax. We do remove sidewalks, but we do not require residents to install sidewalks at this time. And I've talked this over with the street department, and if we ever would possibly go to a bike trail on a sidewalk, so it'd have to be cleared in the winter time, we feel that would have to be the responsibility of the street department, the city, and not the residents.
And I can just share.
I'm sorry. This is Judy again, and I guess I do agree with Deb. I was forgetting about the walking. I always wear cleats on my shoes when I walk in the wintertime. I have a dog I have to walk. And the streets are very icy. And I walk right in residential areas. So the streets tend to be very icy for walking.
And I will just add, spoiler alert, every community in Minnesota, it grapples with this. And so I think one of the things, there are some that are trying, again, when they look at thinking about mobility and how people can walk and bike and get around. And really for our folks who, this is where that question about who rolls, a person who uses a wheelchair or a walker, a cane, that challenge to get just out off of your block can be quite something. So there's not one solution, but the idea that as you're looking at how you can promote it, kind of digging in and experimenting. I referenced Red Wing did a pilot. I'm just going to track down some information and pass it along to Wayne. But looking at where the city was picking up some additional responsibility for clearance. I remember there's a Safe Routes example of a community in Montana that just said, like, these are our priority safe routes to school routes. So those, in the same way that you have priority routes you clear on the streets, those sidewalks and paths were cleared to make sure, because that was one place people were going right away. So there's different things, and it's not to say there isn't a trade-off with cost, but again, that's something through this process that can get lifted up and decide, hey, what do we want to do? How do we want to do it? All right, I'm going to ask another polling question. All right, this one is specifically about improvements. What improvements would you like to see? Again, it's not an exhaustive list, but we have, and you can select two, more sidewalks, more painted crosswalks, more on-street bike lanes, more off-street bike trails, more bike racks, free self-service bike repair stations, pedestrian and bicycle safety curriculum for all ages, and other. There could be something we're not thinking of that you think should be there. You know what to do. Put it in the chat box. I'm going to give about another 10, 15 seconds. It is fun for me. I can see the responses and you see it's very dramatic, and the lines move. Could work on my horse race calling and tell you who's moving into the lead. All right, I am going to end the poll. And I'm just going to share the results. So looks like more off-street bike trails is the strongest, but again, some support for all of them. And I think that, so lets you know there's interest in kind of all the tools. Again, are there specific spaces that you want to prioritize? We'll just pause and see if folks want to speak up. Or do you have a trail you really like? Or Patrick, do you want to pose a question?
I have a question.
Sure.
When the state does the highway, will they extend the sidewalks as far as the improvements on the highway go, or is that something that Pelican Rapids has to do?
So, and I encourage the mayor, Don, to jump in on this one too. But my understanding is that the way the 59 and 108 project is defined by MnDOT District 4 for the year 2024 is it's 59 and 108 within city limits, except with the exception of 108 59 going south from downtown. They're actually not going to do anything to 108, the actual road where the cars drive, from 5th south down to the southern border of town. So the southernmost segment of 108, they're not going to touch it in terms of changing the driving surface. But they may, even on that segment, all the costs have to get negotiated and everything, but they may add some sort of bicycle or pedestrian facility on either side of that, but they're not going to actually touch the road. But the rest of it, the road is getting dug up in 2024 and completely replaced, reconstructed. To the extent that new or additional bicycle and pedestrian facilities are part of that project, of course, they got to work out who pays for what between MnDOT and the city and how it's paid for and all of that. But to the extent that there are new bicycle or pedestrian facilities as part of that, those facilities are only going to extend as far as city limits at the maximum in 2024. There was, you may recall, a question that the city council faced about a month ago about MnDOT District 4 approached the city council and said, the concept plan you did back in 2019 shows a trail to the boat landing to the north. Do you want that or not as part of the 2024 project? And for various reasons, the council voted no. And so if the council had voted yes on that, then that would have been a little bit of an extension beyond the city boundary, but they said no, and so they're cutting it off right at right before 9 there. So I don't know. That's the short answer. I mean, we don't really know what's going to happen on 108 or 59 yet. That's still being figured out by MnDOT. So that's a separate process from this bicycle and pedestrian process. But to the extent that anybody has any comments or opinions about 59 and 108, you're welcome to say them this afternoon, and I will take note of them and pass them along.
Patrick, this is Don in City Hall here, and you can hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, the only thing I want to add to that, you're right. We are having conversations. What the city is going to try and definitely accomplish in 2024 is to have multi-use trails or paths going out all 4 quadrants of the community as far as we can. One of the things that's kind of that Patrick alluded to the south is, we're like the multi-use paths and stuff, especially where we're digging up all of our old water sewer mains. But when you go down to the south end, even though they're not going to be digging up really any further south than 5th Avenue, we're still looking at or potentially going to be talking about getting some type of a path or sidewalk system south of 5th, down by the dollar store, or not the dollar store, General Dollar or whatever. So we're starting to have them conversations about how far we're going to extend them and which directions they're going to extend them. But I think our hope is that our elected officials would agree to try and get them down every direction to some extent. So we had our first meeting regarding that the other day, and I think at this point, MnDOT at least got enough information, specs and cost estimates to get. Part of it is the cost. And the other thing I'll make real quick mention of, even if we don't go beyond 5th Avenue in 2024, MnDOT's going to be going south of Pelican Rapids along Highway 59 in 2026 or whatever. So that'll be another opportunity for us to look at doing some other infrastructure if we can't get it in 2024.
It seems to me that those are the really dangerous places beyond where the sidewalks are. It's where people end up running in the road. They end up walking in the road. Their kids go down the road in the winter, but in the summer too. You don't walk on somebody else's lawn. You walk on the road. And so having those clean in the winter, having a place that's safe for people to walk outside of the city limits really is important.
Yes, and along those lines too, some of the things that we're looking at and MnDOT's looking at too, they put pedestrian cameras up on Highway 59, and they're going to do the same thing here on 108 also. But what the information they're getting from that kind of gives them a better idea how much foot traffic there is along the highway. And if we can't get a path down to a certain point, we're going to be a little bit more specific about where we can have crosswalks to get people across the road to a path or a sidewalk. So we're looking at that also.
So we can open it up in general for questions or comments about the plan. I am happy to put the map back up, Patrick.
Sure. Why don't you put the big map up that shows the whole town?
Okay.
And And we can zoom in on a specific quadrant if anybody has comments or questions about a specific quadrant. But we'll start with the big map.
Okay,
Um,
it's coming.
no problem.
Can I share an observation?
Sure.
The last poll showed that about 2/3 preferred off-road multi-use path, and earlier, of course, there was concern that properties were being cleaned of snow in the wintertime. And so certainly something to discuss is if off-road is the chosen path, to make sure there's a method that it'll be cleared. As someone who walks and bikes in the wintertime, if those paths aren't cleared, that's a major deterrent to usage. So I certainly think that is an important thing to discuss.
Yep, I agree.
Patrick, this is Judy, and I just wanted to let you know that the way that I understand it, well, we have a park board meeting tonight, and we are going to be voting on the spot for the trailhead. At this time, it's looking like that's probably going to be at that old Gabarkowitz property right on Midway. And so I'm thinking that that would be a good spot to have the restrooms and a bike repair station. And then on this map, it looks like there's a bike trail that goes off of that and toward 108. So it kind of goes along that gravel path. But I know the park board is not wanting, well, we don't think it's a good idea to have a bike trail heading in that direction down there because we want people to come toward the city. We want to encourage tourists to be in town, of course. So I'm just suggesting that the sidewalk, if it gets extended out down 108, that it just go off of the existing sidewalks and don't have something that comes around that gravel road, which I think is maybe, Second Street Northwest. So not starting it at Midway, but just starting it up on the 108 highway. And then the second comment I had was, I noticed there's a sidewalk drawn in on Southeast 10th. And I was just going to suggest to save money. I think if that area, that whole Southeast 10th that kind of turns into Maplewood Drive, could have the speed limit lowered to 20 miles an hour rather than 30, and then that it actually be enforced, because a lot of people go through here faster than 30 and kind of do it regularly. So those are my comments on your map.
Could Jill, could you go to view full screen?
Yes. Hang on.
And then maybe advance, go one more slide for a sec here. One more. Okay, this is, Judy, this is the area you're referring to?
Okay, which area is this? Mine
This
is
is
real
south.
tiny here.
Oh, really? Okay, southeast of 59 and 108.
So, okay, where I was talking about reducing the speed limit?
Yeah,
Yeah, where it would turn off, and I think that is called South 10th maybe. Southeast 10th Street, it's kind of by the bank and subway area, the gas station. And then that road comes up and curves around and goes behind the football field.
yep.
Okay, and there's a lot of foot and bike traffic on there. But it's a nice wide street, so I think there's plenty of room for everything. It's just that I think that some people tend to go really fast driving down this street.
Sure.
And so if the speed limit could be reduced and enforced, that might be nice. And then also, and I don't know if it's a possibility, but just parking on one side of the street, because when there's football games or things going on at the ball field, people tend to park on both sides of the street, making it very narrow for getting through. And then if you have somebody come speeding up around the curve, it's kind of, can be dangerous.
Sure. And then Jill, I think if you go forward one more slide.
Hang on. Sorry. For heaven's sakes.
Okay. Judy, am I correct that I know it's on your whatever device you're using, the image is really small, but we are now looking at the southwest corner of 59 and 108. And am I correct that somewhere in this vicinity is the property that the park board is considering this evening for the trailhead?
I think it would be considered northwest.
Northwest. Okay. Jill, could you go back to the first of the quarter slides? So I think if you go back 3, there you go. Okay, now we're looking at the northwest corner of 59 and
Oh,
108.
maybe I'm wrong. Does it go south at 108? Is everything south of 108 considered southwest?
Yes.
Okay, well then I was wrong. You
Okay,
need
all right. Okay, there we are. Okay, so we're now west of 59 and south of 108. So somewhere in this vicinity is the property that the park board is considering this evening to recommend to the city council be the new trailhead site. Is that correct?
correct. Right along the river there.
Okay, all right, great. Well, you heard it right here, folks. What time is your park board meeting this evening?
We have a Zoom meeting starting at 5.
Okay, and that's open to the public, of course.
Well, I don't know. I guess it probably would be.
Okay, or somebody could go there in person if they wanted to, right? I mean, I would.
Well, we're not having. It's not
Not
just-
at City Hall.
It's
Okay.
a Zoom meeting,
All right.
and we've never had. I mean, they're open to the public, I guess. So
Sure. Okay. All right. Super.
Patrick?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Brent. There was a mention about reducing the speed limit, and could Administrator Solga speak to that issue of the proper procedure that has to take place?
Yeah, I'll just mention, if it's on 50, you're not referring to on 59, I think you're referring to, or if it is on 59, or either way, there's a process that we have to go through, but the state dictates and mandates speed settings in residential areas, in commercial corridors, on state highways. And so the city can't just basically reduce the speed limit from 30 down to 20 in a residential zone. That's got to be done at the state level, and then we have to abide by the state rules and regulations. However, having said that, I know the legislature was taking a look at just doing a statewide reduction in the speed limits in residential areas, but I don't think that passed, just like a lot of things didn't pass in this legislative session. But that's what has to happen. It has to be done by legislative action.
So just to clarify, not this past session, but the 2019 session, if it is a city road, or if it is a city held road, that speed can drop down to 20. If it's a county, state aid, trunk highway, no, all the same, like procedural things. But there was a group that is, it specifically came out of folks in Minneapolis to be able to have a little more control over our residential streets. But as it made its way through the legislature, there were enough others from other parts of the state that said it should be any city. And so I don't know if there's an issue, like if it's a town under 5,000 and therefore because of state aid rules, if there's something else, but there was a change in 2019. And then this last session, there was a push to extend that to county-owned roads. That I think did stall out, as to your point, as many other things did. So
Jill, I'll take a look at it and check on that again,
Yeah.
but to my knowledge, that hadn't changed for us, but I'll look at it.
Okay. Yeah, just because I know Minneapolis, St. Paul, and I think Richfield have all done that, where again, city owned roads. So it's and they put up some guidance, but and it does come back to some of the design features, because if this road is nice and wide and you can drop the speed, and even if you're ticketing you have to constantly ticket. You can't just do sporadic. And there's, and that creates some other issues, like how you work in enforcement. So design still very much matters on speed, even when we reduce the speed limits. But I think the point of that route, and this is, Judy, I think what you were saying is, cars do go fast there. And if there's a way to control that, and sometimes doing some of those infrastructure improvements for walking and biking have the added benefit of traffic calming, which means like slowing the speed down, making people more aware that there's other users. So good ideas. Other comments or questions? I stopped paying attention to the chat box. I apologize here.
Anybody who has any comments or questions about, Jill, could you go back to the big map?
Patrick, I am trying to find the chat
Sorry.
box over. No, that's
Sorry
all
about
right.
that. Okay, there you go. Here's the big map. Obviously, we can zoom in on any quarter that you might want us to zoom in on, but does anyone have any comments or questions on any other aspect of this map or ideas that are not depicted on this map?
Patrick, this is Mary.
Hey there.
Hi. I just want to make a comment from our, we're starting to go through project development on 59 and 108. And one of the things that's being considered is a mini roundabout out at County Road 9 and 59. And one of the requirements that we have as MnDOT, when we put those in, even if it's in a rural, it's not in urbanized areas, that we need to put a path in or accommodate bikes and peds. And so, the discussion at the last meeting was that, how, there's some kind of areas along 59 where it's somewhat restricted, but that, we are looking at how, to make sure that there's not gaps there. And then there was, as you acknowledged, was the decision by the city, at this time not to, look at the trail beyond Highway 9. But at that same city council meeting, I think I heard, that didn't preclude this group from including that in the trail plan. So.
Yep. Good point, Mary. So, for those of you on the Zoom call here who might not know exactly what Mary's referring to, MnDOT, like I said a little bit earlier, MnDOT District 4, based in Detroit Lakes, that's where Mary works. They posed the question to the city council about a month ago. Do you want in 2024 a trail running all the way to the boat landing on Prairie Lake, which is basically where that bike symbol is up at the top of this map? And the council decided, no, we don't want that in 2024. Not, no, we never want that ever. But we don't want that on or before the year 2024. Part of the reason was the cost. I think that Bob, I know Bob's on the Zoom call here. I think Bob had very generally estimated the cost as it could be somewhere between $400,000 and $500,000 to take it all the way to the boat landing. And that cost would be on the city. Like MnDOT District 4 was not offering the city a free trail to the Prairie Lake boat landing. They were offering to build it as part of the 2024 project, which, because they would already have the personnel and the equipment out there and the materials, there would be some cost savings involved, but it wasn't a quote unquote free trail. I think the council voted no for two main reasons. One was the cost, which the city would have to bear. The second reason was they got input from both the Prairie Lake Association and the Minnesota DNR, which operates that boat landing, saying that they weren't interested in a trail segment that went to the boat landing and then ended at the boat landing. because they thought that would be too enticing for people to go to the boat landing for purposes other than launching a boat. Apparently the boat landing is signed for no swimming, although some people do swim there. The DNR doesn't really want anybody swimming there. And so they thought that running a trail out there and having it stop there would be too much of a temptation for people to go there to swim, which neither the DNR nor the community really wants, even though it sometimes happens. But there was, even that evening at the city council meeting, there was a discussion about, well, maybe someday in the future, this could be 10 years from now, 15 years from now, maybe someday some future city council might want to extend it to the boat landing, but it would be, the trail would be part of a grand loop that wouldn't stop at the boat landing. It would keep going and somehow it would reconnect. So that, I mean, that's obviously a big topic for another day, but what Mary was referring to was MnDOT is thinking about the possibility of some mini roundabouts along 59. And one of those mini roundabouts would be at 9 and 59. And if they did indeed put the mini roundabout at 9 and 59, by MnDOT's own regulations, they have to accommodate bikes and pedestrians at that spot. And therefore, even though the council voted no on extending the trail all the way to the Prairie Lake boat landing, it would make sense for the project to at least extend the trail at least as far north as the intersection with Highway 9. And, I understand and respect the decision to not extend it to the boat landing at this time, but personally, I do think it would be a good idea to extend it at least to the intersection of 59 and 9. And I want to reassure everybody on this call too that the planning for what exactly happens on 59 and 108, including any mini roundabouts, is there's going to be a lot of opportunity for public input in that process. There are going to be public input meetings for that process, for the 59 and 108 planning process, whether those are in person or via Zoom, depending on the COVID-19 situation. And so if the term mini roundabout makes anybody on this call nervous, don't worry, MnDOT's going to present you with drawings of them. They're going to solicit your input on them. They want to know what the community thinks about them before they put them in. So you're going to have ample opportunity to provide input on mini roundabouts, whether you like them or not. So, okay. Anybody else got any comments or questions or further ideas on this map? And we can zoom into a quarter if we want to.
I think one thing I'm recalling from last week, people were talking about broadly thinking about the routes on here because thinking about loops, how people can move kind of circular, and that sometimes communities will have round, like a Grand Round, or Jackson has a loop around. So that was one piece of feedback that we heard last week. Trying to think if there were any other big things.
Jill, if you could forward several slides to the butterfly bike rack.
Hang on.
Yeah, no problem. And big thanks to Jill for serving as the Zoom master or the tech master for this whole meeting while juggling 2 or 3 other tasks. So, okay. So I want to throw out a question to the whole group here. What do you guys think? What do all of you think generally about artistic bike racks? I'm not necessarily, you want to go forward?
I just was reminding them that there's this.
Okay,
and
so
there's
that
this.
is, right. So the previous one, that's you can go back one. Okay, that is an off-the-shelf commercial bike rack. Sometimes they're single hoops, I mean, they can look like a lot of different things, but that's an off-the-shelf commercial bike rack. This is an original custom bike rack made by local metalwork artists in Fergus Falls. There are actually, Wayne knows, but there are like 8 of them around town. I think 8 of the butterflies and 8 of the prairie grass. I'm just curious, what do people on this meeting think about artistic bike racks in Pelican Rapids? Obviously Lake Region Arts Council is a potential source of grants for this, not the only source, but a potential source of grants. And I know you have a strong arts community here. You have a great art teacher in the person of Kate Martinez, who already did some really cool benches that sort of depict people talking to each other, which I thought were great. Anybody want to comment on the potential of artistic bike racks in Pelican Rapids?
There's one comment in the chat box that they have some in Moorhead and they have limited functionality. So artistic's nice, but function matters. And then also great addition to the community.
Yeah.
Well, Deb, I think bake racks are also good in the community for your
Right.
baked goods.
There you go.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
So Judy says, I like artistic if done by a local artist. So, yes, you have to be very conscientious about functionality when you're designing an unusual bike rack. They need to be able to work. And I think, obviously the butterfly design and the prairie grass design lent themselves well to providing lots of holes where people can run their chain through. Wayne, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
He says they work very well.
Okay, there you go. Awesome. So I agree, though, that some communities have made artistic bike racks where, in hindsight, they realize they focused a little bit too much on the artistry and not enough on the functionality. So that is a hazard. And let me go forward to the bike service station.
Oh, hang on. I may have done something silly.
Yeah, while Jill's looking for that slide, I can just jump on really quick and elaborate a little bit. I shared 2 links in the chat, kind of getting to the question that Rory asked. So there were 2 resources that we used. And I think the chat is available, right? Generally, I mean, you guys can somehow pull the info off of here and share it with the group. So you don't necessarily have to grab them right here from the chat, and maybe Jill or Patrick can share these later. But the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals has bike parking guidance, and that's the link that I shared most recently that says appbp.org/publications. There's a free bike parking essentials guidebook on that website that has a lot of great information about it's just like car parking. There's guidelines that exist for bike parking, and so it talks about placement and spacing and other suggested guidelines for how to put your bike parking together. The other one is a free publication, which is it's basically a toolkit for artist designed bike racks. And so when Carl and Naomi and I sat down to go over what they were going to come up with for designs, and obviously, they came up with the butterfly and the prairie grass, we specifically looked at both of those resources to make sure that what they were designing was both beautiful and functional. And so, one of the basic requirements that we look for in bike parking is that you can, when you park your bike at it, you have 2 points of contact between the rack and your bike, and these meet that requirement. You can park 2 bikes at each and fully meet APBP guidelines by having the 2 points of contact. One of the minor, little details with the butterfly one specifically, there was a thought at one point in time that they were going to have the wings spreading out so that they'd be touching together at the bottom and have some space at the top, kind of shaped like a V, if you can imagine that, and not really slanted, but even just that little bit of a slant would have made them non-APBP compliant, because you would not have been able to lean your bike against it from the outside. And so those were the sorts of things that we were looking at. These racks actually will hold additional bikes that are parked in a non-APBP compliant way. You can nose your front wheel in and lock it in that way as well. So they work really well. And again, those are some great resources that are out there. if you're looking at, potentially doing these, whether it's in Pelican Rapids or wherever. So.
Thanks, Wayne. We got 5 minutes left. I want to do two things really quick. One is, Jill, if you can advance to the bike self-service station. There you go. So I want to put a question to the whole audience here, or the whole group here. Imagine Pelican Rapids could get one of these for, oh, go back one.
Sorry.
Imagine Pelican Rapids could get one of these for free. Where would you want to install it in town? And I would say, go ahead and type it in the chat box in the interest of time. And then the second thing is, I just want to plug two things coming up tonight. I myself just learned with many of you that there is a park board meeting tonight at 5 p.m. As Judy said, it is by Zoom. I suspect that if you're interested in listening in on that meeting, because it is open to the public as a city meeting, City Hall, I presume, closes at 4:30. I bet you could call City Hall and ask for the link to the park board Zoom meeting, and somehow they could get that to you. And apparently the park board this evening is going to be discussing whether or not to make a recommendation to the city council for a specific property to serve as the bike trail trailhead for the city of Pelican Rapids. We are also doing the third in our series of 3 meetings on the bike and pedestrian plan tonight at 6, basically from 6 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. And all of you should have the link to that. So if you're hungry for more, join us this evening at 6 p.m. and we're going to talk about this stuff for another 90 minutes. If you can think of something more exciting to do for your evening, then I wish you a good night. And Jill, do you have any closing words of wisdom for us?
No, it's been a good discussion. Thanks everybody for playing along. And I do have one final poll question because I can't stop myself. Just again, like where we could go with this. And whoops. So let me pull it up. Sorry, 1 second real quick. And the question is, how could you help implement the plan? So when this gets done, and even in that development, but if you can talk to friends or family about this meeting, you can encourage others to join us tonight. You can volunteer to help implement. You can advocate to the city and community elected officials to implement. There's also other ideas, things you may be thinking of. And again, you could feel free to put those in the chat box. But I will take all the links out of the chat that folks have shared, and I will pass that along to Patrick, and then he'll be able to communicate. The other thing, there will be a project website where we'll have information. So
yep. And that's it. Yep. This Zoom meeting was recorded both by Christopher Hoven at Pelican Rapids High School and also by Jill. And we will make that recording available to you pretty soon.
And looks like I'm sharing results. We've got folks offering to provide technical assistance as well. Thank you, Wayne. And we've got folks saying they're going to talk about this with friends and families, because the input process, there are these meetings, but then there's additional points of input, and a plan is only as good as the community that supports it, and that it really represents that voice. So,
yep.
All
and
right.
even if you don't want to join us tonight at 6, if you know somebody who might want to join us tonight at 6, please forward the link information to them. We'd love to see them tonight. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Go ahead, Patrick.
Super. Well, welcome, everybody. This will be the third in our series of 3 Zoom meetings related to the Pelican Rapids Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. I recognize a lot of names here. Because we have a smaller group, and because most of you, if not all of you, have heard some of this previously, I think when we get to my presentation, I'll expedite it a little bit. But I do want to bring people up to speed just in case there's anybody on the call that doesn't have the full context and background. So we're creating a bicycle and pedestrian plan for the city of Pelican Rapids, we being Partnership for Health, in conjunction with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention and other entities such as the city itself and MnDOT District 4. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Jill for Zoom 101, and then we'll go into my presentation. I'll tell you more details.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you, Patrick. I am Jill Chamberlain. I work at Blue Cross Blue Shield in the Center for Prevention and support our work in kind of that broader active living and safe routes to school field. Very happy to be here. And we have been using the poll question, but actually, since we have the number of people we have, I'm going to do something different. So I'm going to ask everybody, feel free to unmute your line. And actually, if we just do a quick round of introductions, and the question, you can have a chance to ask, why do you walk or bike? What reason, what do you get out of it? Is going to be the introduction question. So I'm Jill. Walking, I do bike, but I'm going to talk about walking. What I get out of it is a chance for me to kind of see what goes on in my neighborhood in terms of what flowers are in bloom, what birds are around. When it's winter and it's dark out, I can see into people's homes, which is slightly creepy. And yet I love looking at like old details and who has built-in sideboard or something. So I don't violate property laws. Okay, a good thing we're recording. All right. And then Mayor, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Brent Fraser, Mayor of Pelican Rapids. The reason that I probably walk is for physical and also exercise and also stress reliever. And also see a lot of people, well, not during the COVID times, but other times, and just to get out and meet and exchange greetings with people.
Okay, thank you. All right, next, Brian Christensen.
Hi, Brian Christensen from MnDOT District 4 Public Engagement, and I like to walk for exercise.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Kotowski. I'm a Minnesota Green Corps member at Partnership for Health, and I bike just as a means of transportation. It's just the way I like to get around.
All right, thanks, Katie. Christopher. Thank you. All right, Wayne.
Hi, this is Wayne Hurley with West Central Initiative in Fergus Falls. I like to walk and bike for a couple of reasons. One is I use my bicycle as a means of transportation to go to work and to go to meetings and go to other places. But I would echo what Brent said earlier, is that I really enjoy the social aspect. You know, when you're on your bike or walking, you run into people and you can stop and chat with them and see them, and you don't get the same luxury when you're driving your car. So that's what I enjoy about it.
Thanks, Wayne. Next, Trudy.
Hi, this is Trudy Kurdusky. I'm with MnDOT, and I like to walk for physical activity, and most recently I've been biking with my kids just to be active.
Thanks, Trudy. Next, Kevin.
Hi, it's Kevin with KLJ, helping MnDOT with the final design on this 10859. But I get out for exercise, and it just being outside kind of helps recenter me as work life can get stressful sometimes.
Excellent. All right, and last is Joey.
Joey Lundquist. I work for Ronnie Engineering. I'm on the project, but just on the edge. So I walk for exercise and to get out in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think most, if not all, you've seen the poll questions where we'll ask kind of, is it to support physical health, mental health, be in nature, socialize, get to and from work, maybe run an errand. And what's interesting, without using that question, everybody kind of reflected some of those things. I think we're short running errands, which I can live with that. But there's still that connecting with people and with your community, nature, and again, for your health, both physical and mental. So anyway, thank you. Well, so you all are here. We're glad to have you here. I'm going to hand things over to Patrick. I'll start sharing my screen for the presentation, and then Patrick will just run through stuff and then get into discussion.
Super.
Oops. I'm coming.
Okay, so given that this particular audience here at 6 p.m. Has probably a higher than average level of understanding of what this is all about, I think I'll go through these slides a little bit faster than I have the previous two meetings. But I'm Patrick Hollister with Partnership for Health. We are the statewide health improvement partnership for Becker, Clay, Ottertail, and Wilkin counties. I'm a planner by background, so I go around the 4 counties helping communities become more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. We are very grateful to the folks at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention for giving us a catalyst sponsorship to enable us to do this bicycle and pedestrian plan for the city of Pelican Rapids in 2020. So next slide, please.
Nope.
So as all of you know, last year we had a concept plan process for 59 and 108. We had 3 public input meetings at Lake Region Electric Co-op. This is a photo from one of the meetings. The mayor's up in the front there giving some introductory remarks before we dived into the nitty-gritty of the concept plan. Next slide. Kate Martinez was a huge help last year in many ways. She happens to be an art teacher in Pelican Rapids and also chair of the Pelican Rapids Park Board. And one thing that she did out of many was she helped me apply for to get a bikeable community workshop from MnDOT, Minnesota Department of Health, and the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota. So here are the leaders of that workshop that happened on June 11th, 2019. Part of it was inside the library and part of it was out on bikes. And it was great. We had some excellent discussion about biking in Pelican Rapids. Next slide. So this year we are working on a bicycle and pedestrian plan for the entire city of Pelican Rapids. It includes 59 and 108, but we recognize the fact that MnDOT District 4 has their own process for planning for 59 and 108. And so that MnDOT's own process is really going to drive what happens on 59 and 108. But we intend to have our bike and pedestrian plan done by the end of calendar year 2020. And so in fact, I hope to have it wrapped up by November 2020. And so by November, my plan is to have the document reflect whatever happens to be the latest and greatest thinking by District 4 regarding what's going to happen on 59 and 108, knowing, of course, that even by November 2024, some of it will be preliminary on MnDOT's part, but we will incorporate wherever MnDOT happens to be at on that in the final document. So next, please. As most of you know, we had our Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan Committee for Pelican Rapids had our first and only pre-COVID-19 in-person meeting at City Hall in February. And one of the things that I asked the committee to do was take out some magic markers, Sharpies, and draw on some aerial photos where they would like to see additional bike and pedestrian infrastructure in Pelican Rapids. So next slide, please. We took that information and we digitized it. This is a map done by the nice GIS people at Apex Engineering. And I know at this level, the map's a little bit hard to see, but we also zoomed into quarter sections of town. So here's Northwest, next one, Northeast, next one, Southeast, next one, Southwest. And just really quickly, the green lines are sidewalk. This is proposed infrastructure, not existing infrastructure. Green lines are sidewalk. Light blue is multi-use paths. Dark blue is some sort of bike facility. And then we also have symbols for bike racks, hydration stations, in other words, drinking fountains, repair stations, which is one of those standalone bike maintenance stations, restrooms, and crosswalks. Okay, next. Orange's sidewalk I got from Jill. So one thing that you got to forgive me on, I'm partially colorblind, and my weakest area is sort of the orange, green, brown. And so sometimes I say orange when the rest of the world thinks it's green, or vice versa. So thank you, Jill. Okay, so this is a map of, this is the most recent sidewalk inventory of Pelican Rapids that the community took, as I understand it. And this was done in 2011 or 2012 as part of the Safe Routes to School plan effort. Don Silva and Bob emailed this to me recently. So this is also good information to have. Okay, next. Partnership for Health is very interested in health equity, and so is Blue Cross Blue Shield of Minnesota. And so one of the things that we researched as part of this project is we knew that the two largest immigrant groups in Pelican Rapids are Somalis and Latinos. I was curious, I don't live in Pelican Rapids, I live in Fergus Falls, but I was curious about where they tend to be concentrated geographically within town. This is 2010 census data. We won't have 2020 census data until next summer. But on the left is each census block is color coded for total population in Hispanic or Latino-led households. And so the red is the highest concentration by census block. And then on the right, it is total population in Black or African-American led households, which in the case of Pelican Rapids mostly means Somalis. And again, the highest concentration is in the red. The reason why we're specifically interested in this is because immigrant communities, communities of color, not necessarily specifically in Pelican Rapids, but just nationwide, tend to experience a deficit of bike and pedestrian infrastructure in their neighborhoods. And we want to make sure that these communities get included in the bike and pedestrian plan. Okay, next. Kate Martinez, art teacher in Pelican Rapids and also chair of the Pelican Rapids Park Board, took a lot of photos last year during the 59 and 108 concept plan, and I included two of them in this presentation. This was a Latino family last year attempting to navigate Highway 108 in the winter. Fortunately, the road's pretty dry, but there is no sidewalk, no trail, no nothing. And they were fine with her taking their photo, and they were fine with being identifiable. But after Kate took the photo, she covered their faces and gave me the photo. So, but I thought this was a very telling photo. Next, please. This is another photo that Kate took of a person pushing a stroller on a portion of 59. No sidewalk, no trail. Once again, no particular accommodation for bikes or pedestrians. And so these are deficits or gaps in the pedestrian and bicycle system in Pelican Rapids that we want to address, both as part of the 59 and 108 project and also in the bicycle and pedestrian plan. So next slide, please. I also included a couple photos of sort of an ideal vision of what Pelican Rapids could become more like. Now, I want to recognize that this already happens in Pelican Rapids. It's not like families don't go out biking or there are no trails, or I'm not trying to imply that, but obviously we want more trails, and the city is busy working on the Pelican Rapids to Perm Trail, which is going to also hook up with Maplewood State Park. And Becker County wants to eventually hook up to Pelican Rapids, between Pelican Rapids and Detroit Lakes, to plug Pelican Rapids into the Heartland Trail. So more infrastructure plans are in the works. And of course, we're expecting more trails as trail segments as part of the 59 and 108 plan. So what we want is more families like this family being able to go out and do this type of thing in more parts of town and between the community and other destinations. And so that's what we're working on in terms of infrastructure. So next, yes. So as I said in the previous two meetings, this isn't only about infrastructure. This is about actually the National Safe Routes to School Coalition, and also Blue Cross Blue Shield and we, Partnership for Health. we talk about the 6 E's, equity, education, engineering, enforcement, which some people are now calling engagement, evaluation, and encouragement. And so this would obviously this photo would fall into the education category. Teaching bike safety to kids and adults, or kids and their parents, educating the public about the rules of the road, promotion of bike events, organizing bike events. Wayne is the champion in Fergus Falls for the April 30 Days of Biking, promoting things like May is National Bike Month. All of those things help create a more bicycle-friendly community. Infrastructure is a big part of it, but of course, it's not only about infrastructure. So next slide, please.
Oh, whoops, sorry.
No problem. You got it. So as I mentioned in the previous 2 meetings, we're doing this primarily, this bicycle and pedestrian plan. And in fact, the design of the 59 and 108 project are being done primarily for the benefit of the community of Pelican Rapids itself. Obviously, in case of the trunk highway system, there's also, that serves a very important regional function. So that also plays into it. But I included this slide. I took this photo back in 2014. These guys were biking from Fergus Falls to Fargo. They stopped in Pelican Rapids. And I know that during the summer in Pelican Rapids, at least a normal non-pandemic summer, Pelican Rapids people see a lot of people like this biking through town. And whether they're going to Fargo or they're on their way to North Dakota or on their way to Fort Abercrombie or whatever they're doing. And obviously, we want these people biking through town, and we want them stopping in town and spending money. And so there is a tourism and economic development benefit to becoming more bicycle and pedestrian friendly. I would not characterize that as our primary motivation for doing this bicycle and pedestrian plan, but it is a side benefit of the bicycle and pedestrian plan. Okay, next. So I waxed eloquent about this bridge during the last meeting. I think I'll spare you most of that, except to say that this is a really cool bridge. And I discovered this, it took me about 2 years of driving through Pelican Rapids to finally stop in town and walk around and discover this bridge. And this bridge is a really cool bridge. I threw this photo in because I wanted to acknowledge the fact that Pelican Rapids already does have some really nice bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, and I don't want to overlook that. What we want to do is build upon what Pelican Rapids has already created and make it even better. Okay, next. So then I get into talking about infrastructure. So obviously this is an example of a sidewalk. This was a Safe Routes to School grant ribbon cutting for a brand new sidewalk in Detroit Lakes. I think this was in 2012. Detroit Lakes Mayor Matt Brank is holding the big scissors there. So next slide, please. This is an example of a bike lane. This is at the time the photo was taken, it was a brand new bike lane in Fergus Falls along College Way. And you can still see the old McDonald's before they knocked it down and built the new McDonald's. Bike lanes very often have the bike lane itself. Streets with bike lanes very often have the bike lane itself right up against the curb, or in this case, right up against the gravel shoulder. But you can also have a bike lane where the bike lane is between the parking lane and the driving lane. And sometimes you can even have the parking lane between the bike lane and the driving lane. And I'll show you an example of that in the next slide. This is Richfield, Minnesota, south of Minneapolis. And this is an example of what's known as a cycle track. A cycle track is basically a bike lane above the curb, which is separated for bikes, although obviously people are allowed to walk on the bike lane if they need to. But this is a separated space specifically for bikes, and then it is adjacent to, parallel to the sidewalk. So what Richfield's trying to do here is separate the bicyclists from the sidewalk. There are these bike lanes and the sidewalks exist on each side of the street. In the case of the bike lanes, they're one direction on each side. Okay, next slide. Here's an example of a Sharrow. That symbol encourages bikes to use that street. That symbol also gives specific direction to the bicyclist about where they're supposed to bike. In this case, the symbol is telling the bicyclist, go ahead and take the middle of the lane. The symbol is also telling the motor vehicle driver, watch out, there may be bicyclists here. And it's if the motor vehicle driver is astute enough, the motor vehicle driver also knows that the symbol is telling them not only will there be bikes here, but there will be bikes here taking the full lane in the middle of the lane. Okay, next. So I think my final sort of, well, it's not my final infrastructure example, but my last sort of corridor infrastructure example is a bike trail, or frequently known as a multi-use path. This is a much more, this is a very natural setting for a bike trail. This happens to be the Glendalough Trail in Glendalough State Park near Battle Lake. This was the ribbon cutting ceremony for the trail. But of course, trails or multi-use paths also exist in much more urban settings. For example, the trail that Pelican Rapids already has between the elementary school and Lake Region Electric Co-op. Next slide. So bike racks. This is an example of a commercially available off-the-shelf bike rack. This is what's known as a wave rack. Technically speaking, you could fit 5 bikes on this bike rack. If they are sort of perpendicular to the rack. Now, you can also, this bike rack could also fit 2 bikes if they're both parked parallel to the bike rack. And some people do it that way. You know, it all depends. But next slide, please. Believe it or not, these are also bike racks. Wayne was much more involved in this project than I was, but I think back around 2016, Fergus Falls had a series of events related to monarch butterflies and prairie grass and the importance of that both of them have to our ecosystem. And I believe we are, as a nation, we are slowly losing our butterflies, which is very bad news, not only aesthetically, but also ecologically and agriculturally. So there was this big public information campaign and series of events related to monarch butterflies in Pelican Rapids. And Wayne and some of his friends got the inspiration, well, why don't we do some monarch butterfly and prairie grass themed bike racks? So next slide, please. These are 2 local artists in Fergus Falls, Carl Zachman and Naomi Schlesman, making one of the butterfly bike racks. Wayne and these artists applied for an art grant from Lake Region Arts Council in Fergus Falls. And they got the grant, and they went ahead and made the bike racks, and we had a lovely ribbon cutting for all the bike racks at the library, and it was great. Okay, next. So we have a pretty savvy audience tonight, so I imagine all of you know what this is, but we've had some people on these Zoom meetings that were unfamiliar with this device. This is a self-service 24-hour free bike maintenance station. And typically there are many different models, many different brands. Basically usually there's a post with a hollow canister, and inside you have bike tools on cables, as you can see there. There's a place to put your bike up. Very often there's a tire pump. And if you look carefully, you can see that this person is inflating their front tire in this photo. So these are really cool. And Wayne, how many do we have in Fergus Falls? Do we have 8 or 10, or how many do we currently have in Fergus Falls?
Yeah, I think we have, I'm trying to remember now exactly. I think we have 8.
Okay.
Currently.
So for those of you who do not live in Fergus Falls, probably if you come to town and take a look at these, probably the most obvious one is right on the corner of Lincoln and Cascade in the parking lot of what used to be Shopko. But there's also one in Pebble Lake Park. There's one at the Fergus Falls Library. Wayne, am I correct that all of the ones that are currently in Fergus Falls are by the same manufacturer? And could you tell us what that company is?
Yeah, so all of the ones in Fergus Falls are manufactured by Saris Infrastructure. which used to be known as Bike Fixation, and they merged with a company called Saris, and that division is now known as Saris Infrastructure. And we have the deluxe public work stand models are the ones that are in Fergus Falls.
And how much do those cost roughly, Wayne?
If you get one that's fully decked out, they're going to run right around just shy of $1,500.
Sure. Okay.
But you can, depending upon what options you get it, for a little bit less than that. So between $1,000 and $1,500, depending upon what it looks like and what's included with it.
Yep. This one, would you agree, Wayne? This one to me looks like a pretty deluxe one. This guy has pretty much everything he could need. Do you think? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's a Darrow model.
Sure.
Just based on the fact that Darrow keeps the cables on the interior like that, and the Saris models have the cables for the tools on the exterior.
Sure. Okay.
But
cool.
yeah, I'll throw a link in the chat just in case anybody's curious.
Super. Thanks, Wayne. Okay, next. So I said this at the previous two meetings. I'll say it again. When we talk about the bicycle and pedestrian plan for Pelican Rapids, and also when we talk about the 59 and 108 project and using that project as an opportunity to improve conditions and facilities, amenities for people who bike and people who walk, of course, by definition, we are including handicapped accessibility. That's very important to us. We know that's important to MnDOT. It's important to Blue Cross. It's important to everybody. So the guy here with his back to us is Todd. He works for MnDOT Central Office. And I know this is not his official job title, but I think of him as the Chief ADA Enforcer for MnDOT, or Chief ADA Compliance Officer for MnDOT out of St. Paul. And he does a lot of different things, but one thing that he does is whenever one of these trunk highway projects is coming up, he makes a site visit, at least one site visit before the project with his team, and they travel the entire length of whatever is going to be worked on. This is for full reconstructions. It travels the entire length of whatever is going to be worked on, and basically makes suggestions or tells MnDOT what they need to do in order to, at a bare minimum, bring it up to ADA compliance, but hopefully, when possible, go above and beyond the minimum standard and make it as handicapped accessible as possible. So, okay, next slide. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you once again, Blue Cross Blue Shield, for your Catalyst sponsorship. And we are, as I said earlier, we are part of the statewide health improvement partnership, which is funded by the Minnesota Department of Health. So thank you.
All right, thanks, Patrick. I am going to stop sharing my screen. So I am going to use the poll questions just to see where we are with discussion. But basically, with the remainder of our time, it's a chance to react. I can put the map back up, but a chance for people to talk about ideas that they may have heard or something that they're interested in. We're going to start with the questions. So I'm skipping. First one is more about what kind of support would you like to see in Pelican Rapids? And so there's several answers you can choose to. And which of the following would support you to walk and bike more in Pelican Rapids? So separate spaces for people walking, biking, or driving, better connection with sidewalks or for trails, more safety education for people who bike or walk, more safety education for people who drive, better lighting in the community, winter maintenance, or other. I'll leave this open for about 30 seconds. We'll see. I can see how many people have submitted. So, and again, if you can select two, if you select other, if you would be so kind as to put your idea in the chat box, because that also gives us a way to track it.
And feel free to answer, even if you already answered in one of the previous Zoom meetings. We'd love to hear from you again.
Maybe you've got a different idea based on.
Yeah, there you go. You might have different answers than you did at 2 o'clock today.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to close the poll here in about 5 seconds. All right. And I'll share results. So separate spaces for people. So the percents can sometimes be, since we had people pick 2, but separate spaces. So again, people knowing kind of where they should be and having space there for them. That's okay. Thank you. And better connections, more safety education for people who drive, winter maintenance, and then other. And I think that pertained to some better lighting, especially around the high school. Oh, with an added note, even with the crosswalk flashing lights, it's really hard to see students crossing the road in early morning in the winter. We drive by daily and have nearly hit students. It's super scary. Yes, lighting is important.
Yep.
Does anyone want to share if there are specific areas that they think, would be important in terms of where separate spaces could happen? Or also around connections, better connections.
And you're welcome to either type your comments or your question in the chat box or unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up.
And it's very easy for me to put the map back up. Not as a punishment, just if you wanted to point something out. Don't want to sound threatening. So we've got a comment, would love to see the connections to Heartland Trail in Detroit Lakes and the connection to Perham.
Yep. You're probably going to see the connection to Perham sooner than you will see the connection to the Heartland Trail, because the connection to Perham is already in the works. I don't believe that the entire length between Pelican Rapids and Perham has already been funded, but there are segments of it that have, and so getting to Maplewood State Park and getting to Perham is probably going to occur sooner than getting to the Heartland Trail, but ultimately we want to do both, definitely. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or comments people want to share?
Cool. I think I'll just make one comment about lighting, and the mayor can correct me if I get this wrong, but I believe that up until very recently, Otter Tail Power controlled most of the lights in Pelican Rapids except the core downtown area. But I watched a city council meeting where I think the council agreed to let Otter Tail Power take over the downtown lights as well. And when we do the 59 and 108 reconstruction in 2024, one of the decisions that the city's going to have to make is lighting, what to do about lighting. And obviously they'll make that decision in conjunction with Otter Tail Power and with MnDOT. But there'll be both an aesthetic and a functional decision that has to be made in conjunction with that. The community is going to have to decide, what do we want the new light posts to look like? Do we want decorative light posts? Do we want historic looking light posts? Whatever. But the other thing is, because I've been through this process in, for example, Parker's Prairie, there's all kinds of decisions to be made, even with the quality of light, because there's a spectrum of the light from like yellow to white, and then there's a spectrum from bright to dim. And so those of you who said something about, just light for safety, sure. Yeah, but those are all decisions that are going to have to be made ultimately. Do I have that right, Your Honor?
Yes, you're right, Patrick. One other thing we talked about, there are voids within our transportation corridor where future lights will probably be needed or have to be added in the future. Yes, we've talked about that already.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And then similarly, like that also in conjunction with the person who made the comment about, especially around schools. So there's both that pedestrian scale lighting. So the difference between, the higher up lights, they don't flood the sidewalks in the same way. They do a better job casting light on the street, where pedestrian scale lighting is going to be a little bit lower. And then also making sure, kind of back to some of the education opportunities, that awareness around clothing color, what's more visible as well. So like those things also can help. And then or if there's even additional signal control or things that happen around certain intersections, especially if you know there's little ones that are going to be there, or that it's a busy space where there's more common crossings. So it all fits together. Patrick, should I ask the question about improvements?
Go for it.
Okay. So one more poll question. And this one is, what improvements would you most like to see for biking and walking in Pelican Rapids? Again, you can select 2. And some of the ideas to work with were more sidewalks, more painted crosswalks, more on-street bike lanes, more off-street bike trails, more bike racks, free self-service bike repair station, pedestrian and bicycle safety curriculum for all ages. And as always, there's an other category. All right, I'll give a few more seconds. All right, more off-street bike trails. Woo, yeah. But otherwise, a good mix.
I can't see the results.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I cheated. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I just showed them to myself. I was
Okay.
really
All right.
enjoying the moment. There you go.
More off-street bike trails. I think that we'll have to dig through the poll answers from the last 2 meetings too, but
I think that's been popular.
that's been the big one, I think. Yeah. A lot of people want to be separated from the traffic when they're biking or walking, which is perfectly understandable. What would second place be? Well, I guess it's a tie for second place between more on-street bike lanes and pedestrian and bicycle safety curriculum for all ages. Cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Does anybody else care to comment? All right. Hearing none. So, well, Patrick, do you have other questions? Or actually, does anyone have questions for Patrick, or any other observations they'd want to share?
Any questions related to any aspect of the bicycle and pedestrian plan, or any comments, any suggestions? Or if you have any kind of comment or a question about the 59 and 108 project in 2024, I can try to take a shot at it. If I don't know the answer, I can find somebody who does and have them get back to you.
But I will just, one thing that, and I shared this earlier today as well, but so some themes that we have been hearing about. Well, the first call was both talking about more of a loop, again, thinking about how connections happen. And so that someone could take kind of a grand round sort of walk or ride. And so again, connecting with what infrastructure is there. The other piece that came up in the first call, there was a lot more questions about kind of the practical implementation and cost, how things get paid for, which, and I think the short answer was there's not one way stuff gets paid for. It can depend if it's part of a larger infrastructure project, is it a specific grant? But that was kind of the tenor of that conversation.
Yep. I'll tell you what, Jill, could you go back to the map, the big map that
I can. Now I'm not going to go into the presentation. I have found I'm going to show
the separate PDF of it.
The separate PDF, because that's a little easier to manipulate.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay, perfect. So are you able to do a full screen view on this?
Oh, yeah, actually I probably can.
Okay, super. So we've already received some comments from the first meeting in this last week and the second meeting earlier today about some potential additions or modifications to this map. but certainly now would be an opportunity. If any of you have any comments or suggestions for this map. Maybe for those of you who don't know, with regards to the, one comment that I made at 2 o'clock today was with regards to the 59 and 108 project, MnDOT 4 is going to reconstruct all of 108 within Pelican Rapids city limits in 2024 and most of 59 within Pelican Rapids in 2024. The exception is the southernmost part of 59 from basically Fifth Avenue down. That is not going to be reconstructed in 2024, although they are eventually going to get to that piece. Don mentioned 2026, perhaps, but that's going to happen later. Nevertheless, even though that southernmost segment of 108 isn't going to get reconstructed in 2024, there still is the potential for some bicycle and pedestrian improvements along that segment of 59. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I'm hoping that the city council recently decided for various reasons not to extend a multi-use path all the way to the boat landing at Prairie Lake, but there is a possibility that District 4 is probably going to, when it comes time for the public input meetings, District 4 is probably going to show drawings to get feedback from the community about the possibility of some mini roundabouts in town. And those mini roundabouts, I think they're going to show us concepts of 3 of them. One at the intersection of 59 and 9 up at the north there. And then at both intersections of 108 and 59. And it doesn't mean that it's a done deal. It doesn't mean that District 4 has already decided that they will be mini roundabouts, but I think they're going to run that up the flagpole and see how the community reacts. And I'm told that, for example, at 59 and 9, if they do a mini roundabout there, they're required by MnDOT's own standards to accommodate bikes and pedestrians at the roundabout itself. And therefore, it would make all the sense in the world to just make that little trail extension from basically the turkey plant up to that roundabout, mini roundabout at 59 and 9. And I understand why we don't, why the city's not interested in this at this time in a trail segment all the way to Prairie Lake. But if we could at least get that trail segment up to 59 and 9, that would be great. So I got my fingers crossed for that one.
Patrick, can I add a little bit there?
Yes, sir.
I guess there's probably 2 reasons the city council decided not to extend the bicycle ped trail to Prairie Lake. One was the cost. We're looking at $400,000 to $500,000 at this point, and the other point being that at the dock out on Prairie Lake, it is exclusively for docking and landing boats. And at this point, there are many people that go out there to swim, and they're sunbathing in the dock, and they got probably inner tubes in the water, and it's sort of a hazard. Even though it is restricted for those purposes, there's nobody that really enforces it at this time, and we just didn't want to add to that confusion, like we're inviting people to go out there to swim on an area they are not supposed to be swimming at this time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Your Honor. So I guess maybe this is an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about where we go from here. So as I said earlier, we're hoping to have this plan done by the end of calendar year 2020. I think what we're going to do is sometime in July, we're going to reconvene our committee. I showed you a picture of the committee earlier. We're going to review all the feedback that we got at these 3 meetings. And we're going to, based on the committee's input, we're going to revise this map accordingly. And then I think we're going to go for a second round of public input That might be August, that might be September, but I do want to get at least one more round of input from the public before we put together a draft. My hope is that we will have a draft of the bicycle and pedestrian plan to present to the city council in November of this year. Certainly the council will have an opportunity to suggest any final changes to the document. And then I'm hoping to have it done by New Year's Eve. If in the worst case, we might spill a little bit into January, but I certainly don't want to drag it out beyond January. And then I would also encourage all of you to keep an eye out for the 59 and 108 public input process, which is a separate process from this one. But District 4 certainly wants your input and the whole community's input on what happens specifically on 59 and 108 in 2024. And that's 4 years from now, and there's going to be ample opportunity for public input between now and then. Jill, do we want to hit them with a couple more poll questions, or do you think
I only have one left, which is
Okay.
the what do they want to do next? But otherwise, I mean, and I just say if there any, so I can do that, and then we may just be wrapping up early, which I don't think is a shame
Sure.
on a Monday night. So, all right. So last question. Oops, hang on a second. All right. And this is just a question of getting a sense of how folks might be able to help. So the question, how can you help implement the plan? And you can pick as many as you'd like, but talk to friends or family about this meeting, volunteer to help implement, advocate to city and county elected officials to implement plan, or other. And if you mark other, let us know what that is. And Wayne's mentioning that he's happy to provide technical assistance on plan implementation. Thank you, Wayne. Give just a couple more seconds. By a couple, I meant 10, but all right. There we go. It's a tie and everybody's willing to do something. So that's great.
Could you show us the poll?
Oh, you always wanting to see. I was so excited when I saw it. There you go.
Oh, it is a four-way tie.
I mean, I wasn't kidding. It's not, there's no conspiracy.
Right. Cool. Well, terrific. And we certainly appreciate whatever help you can give us. And Chris, I also want to thank you for recording all three of these meetings. And Chris is going to put all three of them into a single video, and that will be made available on the Pelican Rapids High School YouTube channel, which is terrific. And Jill is also recording this. And I think Jill's 3 separate recordings of each meeting we're going to make available on the website for the bike and pedestrian plan. We are putting together a website specifically related to the bike and pedestrian plan. We don't have it quite ready for prime time yet, but when we get it ready, I'll certainly advertise it, and I encourage all of you to take a look at it. And I think what we'll do is we'll have one last call here for any questions or comments. You can either speak up or you can type them in the chat box. And if we don't hear any, then we'll call it a night. But I'm just looking over the existing comments that we got. Somebody said that, Jill, do you mind if I just run down these?
Nope, I don't mind.
Okay. So Jill corrected my color blindness that orange is the sidewalk. Thank you. And then Wayne gave us a, and we'll make all of this available to people too, because when we record record these Zoom meetings, we also fortunately retain these comments. So nothing is lost here. Wayne gave us 2 links for people who want to learn more about those bike fix-it stations or bike self-service stations, SARS Infrastructure and Darrow. Somebody mentioned that there is a Darrow fix-it station at Detroit Mountain. That's cool. Awesome. Once again, we had the call for better lighting, especially around the high school. And then the comment about even the crosswalk flashing lights can be hard to see in the morning or in the winter. And then Kevin was kind enough to compliment us on this meeting. Thank you. And then I'm reading, give me a second here to read this next comment here. Hang on just a moment.
Yeah, this is, so we did introductions at the, so who's stuck? STUCC. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Yes, hi guys. This is Stacy Salvold. I had my phone calendar incorrect, and I had you guys on at 6:30. So then I started digging, and I was like, "Oh no, I'm missing this." So,
well, we're glad you're here.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. Wonderful.
All right.
So I'll just read this from Stacy here. Agree about the boat landing. Excellent choice, Mayor. Roundabouts going into Detroit Lakes have been excellent on 59. I very much appreciate the efforts related to bike travel and encouraging more biking. I think one of the biggest things we don't have in Detroit Lakes Pelican Rapids corridor to attract visitors and recreational economic use is biking on paved trails. Bemidji, Fergus, Brainerd, Walker, Duluth, etc. all have this economic input into their recreational use because they have great paved trails. I'm a board member at Lakes Area Mountain Bikes and Trails. We are a member chapter of the International Mountain Biking Association. This is excellent stuff for our local communities, especially in rural Minnesota. Thanks. So thank you for all of that, Stacy. And we just thank everybody for participating in this and submitting your comments. And stay tuned for the next phase of this plan. And my final request to all of you is, when you get a notice, either an email from me or communication from MnDOT on a meeting related to either the bicycle and pedestrian plan or a public input meeting or public input opportunity related to the 59 and 108 project, please help spread the word. You can do a lot to help spread the word. Even if you just email it to 5 people, it's great. So with that, Jill, unless you have any anything you want to add.
Nope. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.